Chapter 820. Welcome to XXX Evening News. Below is a piece of news from faraway Asia. According to our reporter's understanding, yesterday morning, a transport plane from our country to Hwaseong stopped at South Korea's Incheon International Airport because of a malfunction. However, it was detained by the South Korean authorities. After our station understood the situation, we immediately consulted the South Korean authorities. The South Korean authorities said that they detained the plane because they received news that there were contraband items in the plane. Based on this point of view, we can ask our country's experts whether the actions of the South Korean authorities comply with the laws and regulations. Almost at 7 p.m. the next day, all the TV stations, as long as they were broadcasting news, reported about the detention incident. Of course, don't think that this was because it was good news material for the United States. In fact, it did not matter whether this news was broadcasted or not. The reason why all the TV stations reported it was because Jiang Hai had called someone. This person was called John Malone. At the same time, he had paid 100,000 tons of fodder. If not, do you think these capitalists would help him? And the reason why John Malone was able to help Jiang Hai was because of this old man. Speaking of John Malone, in fact, most people did not know who he was. Even if they had some understanding of him, they would only know that he was once a shareholder and general manager of a cable television company. Later, he became the largest landlord in the United States. More people knew about him through a book written by the media tycoon, Rupert Murdoch. His biggest characteristic was that he kept a low profile. In fact, he was not worse than Rupert Murdoch. In fact, during his peak, he was the most powerful media tycoon. Speaking of cable TV stations, the Americans knew the TV stations the most. The people in China only knew about TV stations. This was because the NBA and American dramas that they watched were all imported or produced by these TV stations. Many people in China knew about these TV stations. CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox, and Fox Broadcasting. These five were known as the top 5 broadcasting companies in the United States. But in fact, Jiang Hai wanted to say that these 5 broadcasters were just the tip of the iceberg. In the United States, the biggest radio and television company was called Comcast. The biggest internet service provider was called AT&T, Comcast, Time Warner, and Viacom were the true giants of the television industry. They were the 3 largest media companies in the United States, but now there were only 2 left. Last year, Comcast had merged with Time Warner. Before the new era, Time Warner was not considered the top 2. In that era, the largest company was still Comcast, but the second largest was TCI, and the third largest was Media One. Speaking of which, it was all thanks to AT&T. It was precisely because AT&T's subsidiary company had merged with TCI in 1998 and Media One in 1999 that Comcast was able to take advantage of the loopholes. It acquired AT&T Broadband for $72 billion and became the most powerful company in the industry. As for John Malone, he was the boss of TCI. He had turned TCI into the second largest broadcasting company in the United States. Although it had been acquired, his influence and power were still there. Not only did they give him a huge sum of money, but his words also carried a certain amount of weight in Comcast. He said that he would pay attention to this news. So tonight, all the TV stations broadcasting the evening news were paying attention to this incident. It could be said that the South Korea government did not expect this. Almost everyone in the world knew overnight that South Korea had detained a plane from the United States Tinglong Company to Hwaseong. The plane was filled with the best beef, and the estimated price was $26,455,200. This price was not inflated. Jiang Hai's price was $400 per pound of beef, which was 30 tons. It had been detained for a day. The legal representative of the Tinglong Company said that if the beef went bad, he would sue the South Korea government and ask for compensation. Of course, they would not pay the price, but according to the retail price and the contract price with the restaurant in Hwaseong. At the same time, in order to solve this problem, the legal representative of the Tinglong Company, Mr. Jiang Hai, would also go to South Korea. This was a ruthless move. Almost as soon as the news was broadcasted, the South Korea government was stunned. They detained Jiang Hai's plane because they were hot-headed. They felt that this might lead Jiang Hai to South Korea. When that time came, Jiang Hai would be at their mercy. Even if Jiang Hai did not dare to come, they could only suffer in silence. Just as they thought, Jiang Hai did not have the power to go against a country. His good friend, Du Feynman, and the others also did not care about South Korea's matters. So, in their opinion, if Jiang Hai was smart, then they could only pinch their noses and admit it. If he was not smart, then he could not blame them. However, no matter how they thought about it, they did not expect Jiang Hai to have the power to make almost all the television stations in the United States pay attention to such a trivial matter during the evening news. This time, South Korea will be in trouble. Jiang Hai has already made it clear that he will go. Moreover, he is going with the eyes of almost all the people in the world. If he encounters any trouble in South Korea, then the South Korea authorities will have a hard time dealing with it. So, the people who wanted to mess with Jiang Hai the most became Jiang Hai's protectors. Something could happen to Jiang Hai, but it definitely could not happen in South Korea. Otherwise, it would be a devastating blow to South Korea's international reputation. Detain someone's plane, lure their legal representative over, and then the legal representative met with an accident? Thinking about those Gaonanli officials, they couldn't help but feel a chill down their spine. They knew that Jiang Hai was with them. Absolutely, nothing can happen to him. As for the fuse, the 30 tons of beef, well, according to the statement jointly sent by Moses Adams and Chi Li's lawyers in China, the actual price of 1 ton of beef was $26,455,200, and the actual price of the beef was $34,501,800. There was also the calculation of the delayed transportation fee, the restaurant's sales time, and so on. If this batch of beef did not go bad, then they would sue South Korea for $10 million. If this batch of beef did go bad, then they would sue South Korea for $100 million. Moreover, they requested that the beef only be chilled and not frozen, because it would affect the taste. It was well known that chilled food, whether it was fish or beef, could only be kept for 7 days at most. Jiang Hai took 1 day to slaughter the beef and 1 day to transport it. Now that he was detained, it would take another day for Jiang Hai to come over. In other words, the beef had already been stored for 3 days, plus the day they had to hand it over. Currently, South Korea's authorities had 3 days to solve this problem, or they would have to pay $100 million. That was close to 120 billion won. For a country, this was not a small sum. Of course, it was not clear whether they would pay that much in the end, but Jiang Hai could afford to lose 30 tons of beef. It was only about 50 or 60 cows, and each cow was worth $2,000, which was about $100,000. However, South Korea could not afford to lose that much. Especially after the plane was taken away. The person in charge of watching over the plane had already said that the plane was handed over to him to watch over. If anything happened, it would be his responsibility. 120 billion. Even if that person's entire family died, he wouldn't be able to afford it. Therefore, after he heard the news, he called almost every day to urge the authorities to think of a solution. This time, it was Jiang Hai's turn to come over unhurriedly. One had to admit that sometimes, connections were really important. If Jiang Hai did not know John Malone, if he did not have what John Malone wanted, he could only give up the plane dejectedly, just like what South Korea's authorities had imagined. However, the problem was that Jiang Hai had it. With this layer of relationship, Jiang Hai was currently the focus of the whole world. If nothing happened to him and he successfully got the plane back, then it would not be long before everything calmed down. However, if something happened to him, then South Korea's losses would be far more than just compensation. After a phone call, the situation of Jiang Hai and Nan Gaoli, who were originally opposing each other, was directly reversed. Now, the choice was in Nan Gaoli's hands, not Jiang Hai's. Of course, Jiang Hai himself would not easily put himself in danger. After communicating with Qi Li and Jing Jin, the next day, Jiang Hai took Azalina, Galina, and Hua Lizi, as well as Cheryl Li, who he specially called over. They chartered a commercial passenger plane and flew to South Korea. Jiang Hai, whether you believe it or not, this matter really has nothing to do with me. I'm just a messenger, that's all. Sitting in the spacious passenger plane, Jiang Hai looked around. This plane was chartered by him, but he now wanted to buy one. He just asked, and a plane was only tens of millions of dollars. Of course, he was not referring to a big plane. He was not short of money now. But unlike Jiang Hai, who was relaxed, Cheryl Li was really nervous now. Sitting next to Jiang Hai, this was the 13th time she had explained that she had nothing to do with this matter. I know that you don't have so much power to do this. The reason why I brought you this time is firstly because you set up the line over there. You have to know what happened. Secondly, it's also because you told me that you would be my tour guide. Looking at Cheryl Li's appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. It seems like this girl was scared to death. Chapter 8:21. The first reason why Jiang Hai caught her was naturally because of the 2 points he mentioned above. The second was to scare her. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have built a bridge with South Korea. These guys are really ungrateful. They want my grass here, but they want to trip me over there. They are really shameless. He knew that South Korea's people were shameless before, but he didn't expect them to be so brazen. Looking at Cheryl Li's frightened look in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. He wanted her to be afraid, but she wasn't afraid. Jiang Hai did this because he wanted to vent his anger on her. If it weren't for her, Jiang Hai wouldn't give South Korea a chance. However, Jiang Hai wouldn't do anything to her. As she said, she was just a mouthpiece. She couldn't play any role. Moreover, she was Pra Walton's girlfriend. Jiang Hai could only scare her at most. Okay, don't scare her. She has slept with you so many times. Even if she didn't take credit, she still worked hard. Moreover, she was the one who tipped me off about Pra Walton last time. Watching Jiang Hai scaring Cheryl Li, Azalina, who was sitting next to him and watching Wallace fiddling with the data, glanced at Jiang Hai and said to him. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also shrugged, then looked at Cheryl Li in amusement. This girl is really interesting. Don't worry, after arriving at South Korea, I will definitely be a good guide. Hearing Jiang Hai stop talking, Cheryl Li couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then she said to Jiang Hai with a serious face as if she was expressing her determination. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded with a smile, then continued to drink the juice in front of him. After flying in the clouds for a long time, the plane arrived at its destination, Incheon International Airport. After getting permission to land, Jiang Hai's private plane also slowly descended from the clouds. He could see the South Korea Incheon International Airport in the distance. Looking down through the clouds, Jiang Hai also saw a rather crowded area in Luzai. This was quite different from the airports in Huaxia and the United States. There were not many buildings around the airports in Huaxia because most of the major airports were built outside the city. But in South Korea, to be honest, they don't have much land to build an airport. Their capital, Seoul, does not have an airport. If they want to take a plane, they must come to Incheon. After all, South Korea only had a total of 100,000 square kilometers of land, while their population was 56 million. They don't have any specialties, their economy is not particularly developed, and their military is even worse. They might not even be able to defeat North Korea. However, such a country is always clamoring that they are the Republic of Korea. Everything good in the world is theirs. Even the universe is theirs. Well, their national pride is a bit unbearable. In the past, Jiang Hai was also a keyboard warrior. In the world of keyboard warriors, there are two countries that he hates the most. One is Sakura, and the other is South Korea. They are also the only two countries on this planet that can be compared to shameless. With a slight tremor, the plane landed on the runway of South Korea's Incheon airport. After that, the plane went to the nearby parking lot and connected to the covered bridge. Jiang Hai and his team got off the plane. At present, Jiang Hai's team has a total of 12 people. In addition to Jiang Hai, Cheryl Lee, Azalina, Galina, and Wallace, there are 7 other people. But 5 of these 7 people are from the Tinglong Company, and 2 of them are hired bodyguards to protect these 5 people from the Tinglong Company. These 5 people were sent by the Tinglong Company to negotiate with the South Korea government. These people were carrying briefcases and file bags. They were dressed in suits and ties. Under the protection of 2 bodyguards, they walked forward with serious faces. When they walked out, they really looked like they had something to do. Because it was a private plane, Jiang Hai and the others took the VIP channel. However, unlike the general VIP channel, there were a lot of people waiting in the South Korea VIP channel. These people all had a unified name, fans. As mentioned earlier, South Korea has nothing to export or sell. So, they are mainly exporting culture. The so-called Korean wave, under the intentional interference of the government, can be said to have nearly 1/3 of South Korea's economy supported by their so-called idols. They have a lot of die-hard fans abroad, even more so in China. So these people waiting outside the VIP channel are here to see the stars. When Jiang Hai and his team came out, many people paid attention to them. But after looking at them, they don't seem to know who Jiang Hai and his team are. Jiang Hai and his team are all foreigners. Except for Jiang Hai and Cheryl Lee, who are yellow-skinned, they know everyone else. And Jiang Hai's appearance, to be honest, has not reached the level of a sissy. So these people just glanced at Jiang Hai and didn't riot. But at this time, another group of people came out of the VIP channel. As soon as they came out, some sharp-eyed fans saw them and then screamed loudly. "Ah, Appa! Gay Appa! Fuck the waves!" The sound waves rose in an instant, scaring Jiang Hai. Then, he saw the fans rushing over like a flood. Fortunately, South Korea's security team is very dedicated to this situation. They immediately surrounded these people, trying to separate them. But no matter how experienced these security guards are, it is impossible for them to squeeze through hundreds of people. The shrinking circle shrank in an instant. And Jiang Hai and his team didn't have time to go out, they were directly surrounded by these people. They were forced to keep retreating. Jiang Hai is indeed strong, he has the strength of 8 people, but 8 people can't withstand the push of hundreds of people. For a while, he can only protect Azalina, Wallace, Galina, and Cheryl in his arms. Azalina and the other 2 were looking around, they want to see if there are people targeting Jiang Hai here. But after glancing around, they found that there seems to be no one targeting Jiang Hai. In fact, with their strength, or Jiang Hai's strength, they can go against the flow of people and squeeze out. But they can go out, but the people of the Tinglong Company and Cheryl can't go out, so they can only keep being pushed back. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai decided not to go out for the time being. He will return to the VIP channel and go out after the riot here is over. He also made a gesture to the 2 bodyguards over there. The security guards, who were also squeezed like a boat, also reacted. They protected the 5 people who were already a little dumbfounded and retreated to the VIP channel. "Thank you, everyone, thank you. You must pay attention to the arrangements, be careful not to get hurt." Unlike Jiang Hai and his team, there was a man among the group of people who came out later. He was being protected by the security guards while waving his hand happily. Jiang Hai didn't understand what he was saying. Jiang Hai only knew that he was being pushed back, and that guy was blocking his position. After all, this circle was only so big. Jiang Hai had no choice but to squeeze past this guy. However, Jiang Hai was carrying 4 girls, so when he walked, it was inevitable that he would take up more space. When she walked past the man, she accidentally squeezed him and stepped on his foot. But unexpectedly, This made this guy angry. After seeing that Jiang Hai stepped on him, he didn't mean to apologize. This person instantly stretched out his hand and grabbed Jiang Hai's coat. Feeling that someone was grabbing him, Jiang Hai also looked back. "Hey, you stepped on me." Seeing Jiang Hai, this person said loudly, but he spoke in Korean, and Jiang Hai couldn't understand. "I don't understand what you're talking about. What's the matter?" Looking at the hand that was still grabbing him, Jiang Hai frowned and spoke to him in English. After all, South Korea used to be stationed in the United States, so they still taught English very seriously. Although the intonation was a bit strange, at least, he understood what Jiang Hai said. "Foreigner? Humph. Idiot." After hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person was stunned for a moment, then he let go of his hand. One of the good things about South Korea's celebrities was that they were very sensible in front of others. After all, they represented the face of the country. Especially when facing foreigners, if it was South Korea, they might hate Japanese people the most. After all, in World War II, Japanese people harmed Korea more than Hwasya. But now, if South Korea's artists choose to perform abroad, their first choice would always be Japanese. So, don't talk about whether they were shameless or not. This was the essence of this country. However, although he wouldn't openly clash with foreigners, he still muttered in a low voice. But he didn't expect that Jiang Hai had someone here who could understand Korean. At this time, Cheryl Lee, who had been beside Jiang Hai, walked out first, glared at this man and said loudly, "Who are you calling an idiot, you pig?" Hearing Cheryl's pure Korean, this person was stunned for a moment, then he reacted. This woman was scolding him, so he wanted to teach her a lesson with a fierce look. In South Korea, male chauvinism prevailed. If a woman scolded a man on the street, it was easy to have a conflict. Seeing this person walking over with a fierce look, Jiang Hai also stepped forward and blocked in front of this person. At the same time, he pulled Cheryl behind him. Chapter 8:22. Looking at Jiang Hai who stood in front of him, this person couldn't help but feel a little weak. Jiang Hai was originally 186 meters tall, but since he got the Dragon Balls, he went through a second growth. Now he is 196 meters tall. His weight is 115 kilograms, which is 230 kilograms, but it's not very obvious because it's all muscle. In addition, he likes to eat beef, so it's not like the traditional streamlined muscles of Hwasya, such as Bruce Lee's. His muscles are very big, but they are somewhat similar to those of European and American people, but not the kind that uses protein powder. His arm is thicker than his head. Jiang Hai's arm is indeed not thin, but it's not thicker than his head. Speaking of which, it's a bit like Gwa de Statham or Baldy Diesel, but his body is still a lot stronger than ordinary people. As soon as he walked in front of this person was a little scared. This person's height is about 1.8 meters, which is half a head shorter than Jiang Hai, and his body is also 2 times smaller. In addition, Jiang Hai is a foreigner, so he is also a little embarrassed. At this time, there are also some sharp-eyed fans who noticed the situation in the encirclement and couldn't help but feel a little excited. At this time, a man wearing glasses walked in front of this person and whispered to him. This person glanced at Jiang Hai and was about to leave, but Jiang Hai won't let him go easily. "Kid, aren't you very arrogant? Why are you leaving?" Seeing this guy still dare to be rude to him, Jiang Hai immediately grabbed this person's collar, and seeing Jiang Hai make a move, the others around him immediately rushed towards Jiang Hai. Of course, they didn't come here to fight, but to separate Jiang Hai and the others, but the people behind Jiang Hai are not to be trifled with. Azalina, Galina, Hua Lizi, and 2 bodyguards almost made a move at the same time, but unlike Azalina, Galina, and Hua Lizi, these 3 people directly defeated their opponents in an instant, while the other 2 people just fought with their opponents. Although they have the upper hand, they didn't solve the problem so quickly. Kyo seems to be beaten. Seeing the people in the circle seem to have made a move, some fans also shouted at this time. As a result, more than 100 people outside seemed to have gone crazy. They rushed into the inner circle crazily. The security guards there couldn't stop them anymore. But at this moment, suddenly, several black cars came from a distance and stopped outside these people. Then, a group of men in black jumped out of the car and quickly ran to the crowd. While separating the crowd, they escorted a middle-aged man into the inner circle. The fans on this side were originally very agitated, but after these people joined in, they instantly forced themselves to calm down. This was because the person in the lead had already revealed his gun when he separated the crowd. Although there were hundreds of fans and they were all very brainless, they were not so brainless that they would send themselves to their deaths. The people in front had calmed down, and the people behind had also been forcefully pushed aside. This made the security guards breathe a sigh of relief. If there was a stampede here, they would also be responsible for it. The middle-aged man didn't care whether these security guards were relieved or not. When he saw Jiang Hai standing there intact, he was the most relieved person. Under the escort of the men in black, he walked into the circle of these security guards and came to Jiang Hai with a smile on his face. He bowed without saying a word, completely ignoring the man who was still being pulled by Jiang Hai by the collar. "You are here, we just went to the airport to pick you up, but after arriving, I learned that the tower gave you an order to come out personally. I'm really sorry, I'm very sorry." Looking at Jiang Hai, the middle-aged man said to Jiang Hai with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai frowned. It seems that this is the person who came to pick him up. Although Jiang Hai doesn't know this person, the man in Jiang Hai's hand is very familiar with this person. This was because he often saw this person on TV. This person was an absolute high official on the second level of the pyramid in South Korea. At this moment, he was quite confused. He could not understand at all why this high official in his eyes would come to curry favor with this countryman in front of him. Could it be that this person's identity was very important? Thinking of this, a few drops of cold sweat appeared on his forehead. "Sorry, there's no need. You'd better deal with the situation here. I think your country doesn't seem to welcome me very much. As soon as I come out, you want to beat me up. How about I go back first?" Seeing this person come, Jiang Hai glanced at the guy in his hand indifferently, then threw him directly to his subordinates, clapped his hands, and pointed at him with contempt. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person still had a smile on his face, but when he looked at this guy, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of murderous intent. If it is really because of this guy, Jiang Hai will go back, then he will kill this guy. Seeing this person's gaze, this made the legs of some of the people who were already weak after being mentioned by Jiang Hai for a long time become even weaker. The reason why he glared at this guy was mainly because that batch of goods was actually seized by him. When he detained the money, it was naturally an order from the higher-ups. However, when Jiang Hai turned the tables, the people from South Korea abandoned him and told him that this matter had nothing to do with South Korea. South Korea would participate in the negotiations, but if he really wanted compensation, then he should pay for it himself. $100 million, 120 billion won. Even if this person was not a bandit, he still couldn't come up with that much money. If he really has to pay so much money, then he will really have to die with this guy. Don't worry, no one will not welcome your arrival. I will take care of these small matters for you. I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Li Shihui, and I'm mainly responsible for all the affairs of your visit to South Korea this time. After glaring at this guy, the man said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also smiled, then waved to the crowd and walked out of the crowd. Seeing Jiang Hai walk out, the men in black naturally formed a path for Jiang Hai to pass. On the other side, Li Shihui naturally followed with a smile on his face. He was afraid that he would make a move that would annoy Jiang Hai. Those who were in conflict with Jiang Hai also stopped at this time and watched Jiang Hai leave the crowd. After Jiang Hai and the others got in the car, a man in black walked over from a distance and waved at the guy and his manager who were still in a daze. The two immediately left the fan group and got into a car. The man then got into another car. After getting in the car, the atmosphere in the whole car was quite cold. I'm really sorry for causing trouble for you. It had to be admitted that the people of South Korea were quite flexible, especially this male artist. As soon as he saw that the atmosphere was not right, he immediately lowered his head and admitted his mistake. Li Xingji, right. If you want to apologize, don't say it to me, because you didn't offend me. That man is a distinguished guest of our South Korea. I see that you are also a well-known artist here. If you don't get his forgiveness before he leaves South Korea, then don't blame us. Looking at the guy in front of him, oh no, it's Li Xingji, a trace of anger flashed in the eyes of the man in black. What a joke, his fate and Li Shihuai's fate are connected. If Li Shihuai is finished, then he is finished. No one knows better than them about Jiang Hai's position in their hearts now. I understand. Please tell me about that honorable guest. As soon as he heard this, Li Xingji knew that he stepped on a landmine this time, but fortunately, the great reputation he made at the beginning still has some effect, and there is a chance. That person is called Jiang Hai, Hua Xia, and he is currently opening a manor in the United States. Hearing his words, the man also said very plainly. A Hua Xia man, opening a manor in the United States? That. Hearing this, Li Xingji was dumbfounded. Whether it was in Hua Xia or Korean customs, a cattle breeder wasn't considered a social celebrity. How much money could a cattle breeder have? Why did the domestic leaders pay so much attention to him? Don't think of him as an ordinary manor lord. What he earns in a year is more than what you can earn in 10 lifetimes. Let me tell you, let's not talk about his beef and fish. Just the grass he sold a few days ago, he earned $2 billion in 1 year. He's here this time because of some political matters. If you dare make him unhappy, we'll make your family cry. Looking at Li Xingji's eyes, the man in front of him naturally knew what he was thinking. It seemed that Li Xingji hadn't been beaten enough. So, the man was about to reveal a little information about Jiang Hai. After hearing what he said, Li Xingji was indeed dumbfounded. $2 billion from selling grass. And it was dollars. Assuming that $1 could be exchanged for 1,201, how much was 2 billion? Li Xingji had been famous for a few years now, but his net worth didn't even add up to 5 billion won. Everyone who paid attention to Korean entertainment companies knew how ruthless the commission was. Indeed, as the man said, what Jiang Hai earned in a year was more than he could earn in 10 lifetimes. Thinking this, he couldn't help but shudder. How could he ask for Jiang Hai's forgiveness? That was also a problem. At that moment, Jiang Hai didn't know what the man was thinking. All he knew was that he wouldn't care. Asking him to forgive someone? It was a little difficult. Who in the world didn't know that he was narrow-minded? He could only say that there was no such thing as a saint. Chapter 823. Now we're going to Shilla Hotel. I've booked a luxurious suite for you. It's also the best hotel in Seoul. I hope you can have a good rest. After getting into the car, Jiang Hai and the others were pulled by these people to their destination. Maybe it was because they were afraid of Jiang Hai, but the person in charge of receiving Jiang Hai was very careful. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't know that if the negotiation didn't go well this time, the person in front of him would have to pay the $100 million. It would be strange if he didn't curry favor with Jiang Hai. Oh, okay. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai nodded and said calmly. Then he began to look at the night scenery outside. Incheon wasn't too far from Seoul. There were 2 airports in Seoul. One was Gimpo, but it only flew to Seoul. But to be honest, it wasn't flying at all. How big was South Korea? So, the so-called planes there were more to Jeju Island, and the planes going to other countries all went from Incheon. From Incheon to Seoul, it only took a little more than an hour. Moreover, these people had license plates, so no one would say anything even if they sped up and ran red lights. After getting off the highway, they arrived at the capital of South Korea, Seoul's special city. In fact, for Hwaseong people, they were more used to calling this city Seoul. But South Korea's pride didn't allow them to call it Seoul, because Seoul could be considered an ancient name. At that time, the capital was Pyongyang. Korea was different from Hwaseong. Hwaseong had a large territory and a long history. There were many places that could be used as the capital. The capital, Nandu, Sidu, and even Ryukong used to be the capital, but Korea couldn't. Since ancient times, Pyongyang was the capital of Korea. Although Seoul was also very important and was known as one of the three capitals, it wasn't that important. It was just a city. It wasn't until 2005 that Seoul officially changed its name to Seoul. This city could be said to be one of the most crowded cities in the world. Jiang Hai already learned that South Korea has a total of 30 million people, and Seoul has 10 million people. In other words, there are 10 million people living in this city, and there are also many people who live in other places but work in Seoul. It could be said that this capital supported 2/3 of the people in South Korea. This was no joke. Because of this, the periphery of the city was very large. Not long after they got off the highway, Jiang Hai saw a lot of buildings. Cheryl Lee sat beside Jiang Hai and introduced Jiang Hai to the nearby scenic spots. She also told Jiang Hai what was fun and delicious in South Korea. She knew that Jiang Hai was interested in these things, so she tried her best to explain. Li Shihui on the opposite side wanted to speak several times, but he couldn't get a word in. Jiang Hai naturally saw the scene, but he wasn't kind enough to help this guy out. For Jiang Hai, he came this time to denounce these people. How could he be kind enough to give these guys a good face? Finally, when Cheryl Lee said that she was tired and was drinking water, Li Shihui found an opportunity. That, Mr. Jiang Hai, my boss asked me to ask you when you have time. We can negotiate as soon as possible. Looking at Jiang Hai, the man said seriously. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai pretended not to hear. Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, Li Shihui couldn't help but smile bitterly. He naturally knew that Jiang Hai was just pretending. The car was very quiet, and his voice wasn't soft just now. He could see that this man was not easy to serve. But no matter how hard it was to serve him, he still had to serve him. After all, if Jiang Hai wasn't happy, he could just leave now. Not only would he not be able to report to his superiors, but the South Korea government would also not forgive him. After all, this would damage their international image, and he would be the best scapegoat for that person. At the same time, he wouldn't be able to pay back the $100 million that Jiang Hai demanded in compensation. At that time, he would have no other choice but to die. For his own life, for his own future, and for his family, he had to endure this. As long as Jiang Hai was happy, he would do anything. The most important thing now was to build a good relationship with Jiang Hai. That, Mr. Jiang Hai, what do you think of my suggestion just now? He braced himself. Since Jiang Hai was ignoring him, he had to do it. With a smile on his face, he looked at Jiang Hai eagerly and continued to ask him. What's the rush? I just got here. No matter what, I'll have to play for a few days first. Hearing this, Jiang Hai smiled disdainfully. Did he think he was so easy to deal with? He wanted these people to know what it meant to say that it was easy to invite a god, but difficult to send him away. Mr. Jiang, this is really too late. I'll tell you the truth, the person who detained your plane was me, but I was ordered to do so by the higher-ups. Now that you said you wanted $100 million in compensation, the higher-ups gave up on me. They said that if you want compensation, I'll be responsible for the money, but where do I have 120 billion Korean won? My entire net worth is less than 10 billion. If you really want me to compensate, I can only die. Looking at Jiang Hai's calm expression, the man spoke in a low voice with a helpless expression. He was begging for mercy and pretending to be pitiful. But what he got in return was only Jiang Hai's indifferent smile. What did his death have to do with Jiang Hai? What does this have to do with me? Mr. Lee? Looking at him indifferently, Jiang Hai smiled disdainfully. I was rude. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, a trace of anger flashed across the man's face at first, but then it disappeared. He knew that he couldn't threaten Jiang Hai. The only thing he could do was to beg Jiang Hai to be merciful. He was now desperately thinking about how he could please Jiang Hai. At this time, he glanced at Cheryl Lee, who was sitting on Jiang Hai's left, Hua Lizi, who was sitting on the right, Azalina, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, and Galina, who was sitting in the car behind. He seemed to know Jiang Hai's weakness. As for what weakness? Was there a need to say it? It was a weakness that all men had. It was like this: I don't know what Mr. Jiang Hai knows about our country's culture. Since he had made up his mind to please Jiang Hai shamelessly, he had to cater to his tastes. Since Jiang Hai liked women, he had to lead this topic up. I'm from the northeast, Bingcheng, so I know a little about this country. Barbecue, cold noodles, plastic surgery, Korean dramas. Hearing this person's words, Jiang Hai still answered him because it had nothing to do with business. However, after thinking about it, he could only think of these things. As for the rest, such as shameless, the universe is yours, and so on, Jiang Hai didn't say them out loud. The self-esteem of this nation was quite abnormal. If he said it out loud, they would fight him to the death, and it would be troublesome. Yes, the food in South Korea is quite good. I've also prepared our most famous Korean food for you tonight. You can have a good taste. As for Korean dramas, this is also our culture. I don't know if Mr. Jiang has a favorite girl group or celebrity. Hearing Jiang Hai's answer, Li Shihuai also laughed. This was a good start. He was afraid that Jiang Hai would ignore him. As long as Jiang Hai ignored him and had a bad attitude, he could tolerate it. Girl group? I don't know. To be honest, in my opinion, Korean female celebrities all look the same. Jiang Hai was already very polite by not mentioning their faces. He remembered that there was a joke on the internet. It said that a few Hua men who married foreigners were chatting together. Some said that after marrying a woman from India, they found out that the status of Indian women was so low. Some said that after marrying a woman from Russia, they found out that Russian women could be so fat after marriage. In the end, the man who married South Korea said that after marrying a woman from South Korea, he found out that marrying a woman from South Korea was like marrying a woman from the whole country. Jiang Hai didn't have a good impression of South Korea from the bottom of his heart. Therefore, he didn't have a good impression of those women from this country who were coquettish. Moreover, there were often bad rumors about them on the internet. As for those Korean dramas, he wouldn't watch them. Only old ladies and middle-aged women would like to watch those things. Jiang Hai liked to watch comedies. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Shihuai couldn't help but wipe his sweat. Jiang Hai's answer seemed to make him unable to intervene. You really don't know about South Korea's girl group? Although I can't tell them apart, I still know some of the representative ones. You don't know any of them? But before he could speak, Cheryl Lee spoke first. I really don't know. I don't pay attention to these things. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai really didn't pay attention to these things. Even if you don't pay attention to them, you should have heard of their songs. Their songs are quite popular in Asia. It's called Nobody, Wonder Girls. Cheryl Lee said as she sang a few lines and gestured. Oh, I know this song, but those people are a little ugly. Jiang Hai thought for a moment. He had indeed heard this song. After all, it was really popular at that time. It was played in the streets and alleys. Jiang Hai also heard it, but he didn't know how to sing it. Che, I remember that song is also very popular. It's that Jejejej. Girls' Generation. Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai contemptuously, then gestured there. Oh, I know this too, but I didn't look carefully. Do they all look the same? Hearing this music, Jiang Hai also clapped his hands. He also remembered this, but he couldn't remember what those singers looked like. Chapter 8:24. Jiang Hai wasn't very interested in Korean stuff. He didn't like girl groups, Korean dramas, and so on. Especially some Korean stars who insulted China. Jiang Hai naturally disliked them even more. He used to be one of the keyboard warriors who crusaded against these people on the internet. But it was impossible for him to stop so many people from liking him. Especially some brainless little girls and middle-aged and elderly women. Thinking back, when Jiang Hai's grandmother was still alive, she especially liked to watch Korean dramas because she liked to watch those Zhang family and Lee family short stories. Later on, when he went to school, one of his roommates especially liked those Korean girl bands. Of course, he wasn't a true fan. If he counted, he was probably a true fan of the legs. The dance of the Korean girl bands, hee, you know. That era seemed to be the era of thighs, oh no, the era of ants, the era of young girls. It was the most popular time. In Jiang Hai's dormitory when he went to school, every day was despicable, 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 or oh, so Jiang Hai also heard some of it. He wasn't the kind of person who would stop others from liking something he didn't like. From what he had seen and heard, he also knew about this group. But to be honest, he had also seen the music video, but he couldn't tell who those people were at all. At most, he could tell their height, their hair color, and so on. As for the resemblance, well, Jiang Hai could only laugh. Not all South Koreans had undergone plastic surgery. Just like how there were good people in Japan, there were also good people in South Korea. However, it was difficult to distinguish them. Oh, it's good that you know, it's good that you know. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Shihui couldn't help but wipe his sweat and then laughed a few words. For him, as long as Jiang Hai knew, this was the most important thing. After that, he stopped talking and picked up his phone to send a text message. On the other side, Cheryl Lee was introducing Seoul to Jiang Hai. Since Jiang Hai said that he wanted to stay here for a few days, he naturally had to go to those scenic spots. Cheryl Lee was also introducing him to Seoul. There weren't many places to play in Seoul. Their first choice was those palaces and the like. However, Jiang Hai and the others had been to the imperial capital's Forbidden City before. What's so fun about Seoul? Next was Ledian World. This was an amusement park, so Jiang Hai wasn't interested in it. South Hill Park is a sacred place for couples in Seoul. But Jiang Hai only feels that it is a place for couples. However, since they were already here, it was impossible for them to not go anywhere. Although they looked down on this country, they couldn't just not go anywhere since they were already here. Therefore, Jiang Hai was still discussing with Cheryl Lee where they should go to play these few days. Soon, the motorcade arrived at the Shilla Hotel in Seoul. The Shilla Hotel was a hotel under the Seoul Samsung Group. It was one of the top 2 hotels in Korea. The only one that could compete with it was the Lotte Hotel in Busan. I won't introduce the Shilla Hotel here. Anyway, for Jiang Hai, this was just a way to make up the word count. The current plot was quite smooth, so he was too lazy to use these things to make up the word count. It was easy to interrupt the flow of the plot. The car stopped in front of the Shilla Hotel, and a special doorman came to open the door. Then, Jiang Hai and the rest went directly to the elevator and went to the room specially prepared for them in South Korea. Jiang Hai lived in a suite with South Korean characteristics. This was a 5-bedroom room. 3 of the rooms were occupied. Each room had a separate bathroom, an independent air conditioner, a TV, and a small balcony. There were also 2 rooms. One was a study room, and the other was a game room. There were a lot of game consoles and the like. Jiang Hai's master bedroom was quite big, but what surprised Jiang Hai was that there was no bed in the master bedroom. South Korea and Japan were very similar in one thing. Although they both learned from Hwaseong, they liked to sleep on rice. A house with South Korean characteristics naturally needed to sleep on rice. Once the quilt was spread out, the entire room would be a bed. This made Jiang Hai very surprised and happy. Originally, he was thinking that if he and the 4 girls did it together, if the bed was too small, then they wouldn't be able to move around freely. But now, the whole room was their battlefield. After taking a look, Jiang Hai also felt that this thing was quite novel. After walking around the room, he left the room. This suite was specially prepared for him, Azalina, Galena, Wallace, and Cheryl Lee. Naturally, the others couldn't stay here. They had their own guest rooms on the same floor, so it was quite convenient. After everyone had settled down, Jiang Hai, Azalina, and Cheryl went to participate in the banquet prepared by Li Shihuai. As for Hua Lizi and Galena, they had to decorate their rooms. They couldn't trust anyone else. As for Jiang Hai and the others, they went to the banquet hall specially prepared by Shilla Hotel. Jiang Hai's subordinates naturally had their own banquet, while Jiang Hai and the others sat alone in a large room. This restaurant, which seemed to be able to seat about 20 people, only had Jiang Hai and the others. Jiang Hai and the other 2 people brought by Li Shihuai. For this meal, Jiang Hai and the others paid attention to the dining system. In other words, Jiang Hai and the others each had a long table in front of them. After they arrived, Li Shihuai clapped his hands to signal that the dishes were served. Then, many waiters came in and placed all kinds of dishes in front of Jiang Hai. This is our country's national cuisine. This is our country's unique handing food. In ancient times, it was exclusively for the monarch's palace cuisine. Later, it was liberalized, and it was relegated to the scholar officials class. Recently, we have democracy, so this way of eating is also widely spread among the people. However, the average civilian eats 3, 6, 9, and 12. What we are eating now is the highest grade of Chuanzhou handing food. There are 18 kinds of kimchi, 6 kinds of seafood, 6 kinds of meat, 6 kinds of vegetables, and 6 kinds of fruits. Please taste it well. Looking at the dishes here, Li Shihuai also put on a smile and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also picked up his chopsticks and glanced at the dishes that were being served. There were indeed many types of dishes, but the portions, Jiang Hai was sure that as long as he opened his mouth a little wider, he could eat a portion in one bite. After the dishes were all served, it was indeed a big table, but to be honest, Jiang Hai didn't feel that there was anything vulgar about it. He picked up his chopsticks and picked a few to take a look. Basically, he knew everything on the table. On the periphery were 18 kimchi. It had to be said that the southern Gauls really liked kimchi. Speaking of Korean kimchi, the first thing that came to mind was spicy cabbage. This was a necessity. The spicy cabbage was the most eye-catching. At the same time, there were 3 types of kimchi. The spicy cabbage that Jiang Hai was more familiar with was the spicy cabbage, the pickled cabbage, and the red soup cabbage. Next, there were pickled cucumbers, pickled radishes, pickled radishes, pickled pickles, 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 pickles, carrot pickles, and so on. As for the seafood, Jiang Hai didn't have much of an appetite. Crabs in soy sauce and live octopus. Other than that, there was a grilled fish, a stewed fish, a bowl of seafood soup, and a spoon. There were 6 types of seafood. Among the 6 types of meat, 5 of them were grilled meat. There was grilled marble beef, which seemed to be the legendary Korean beef. There was also grilled pork belly, grilled pork, grilled steak, grilled lamb chops, and stewed beef. These were 6 types of meat. Lastly, the vegetables and fruits were all stir-fried. Those dishes were mainly used to wrap the grilled meat. Other than that, there was a small bowl of rice. This was the so-called Korean cuisine. Looking at the food in front of him, Jiang Hai felt that the former king of Huaxia had a tough life. This kind of food, although compared to the Huaxia's emperors, it was still far from being comparable to the Huaxia's ministers and rich people. But to be honest, Jiang Hai was treating them to the best food here. Although he was used to eating the beef, fish, pork, and vegetables he grew, he didn't feel like eating them. But if it wasn't too strange, he would still eat it. Thinking of this, he also moved his chopsticks, wanting to make do with the food and then go back to rest. However, just as he was about to start eating, someone knocked on the door of the private room. After getting permission, the door opened, and 2 women appeared outside the private room. Their breathing was obviously a little messy. When they saw the situation inside the private room, they couldn't help but let out a long sigh. "We're really sorry, we're late because we had a job." Looking at Li Shihuai, the 2 immediately bowed 90 degrees, and then said with a serious face. Although Li Shihuai was like a grandson in front of Jiang Hai, in South Korea, except for a few people, everyone else was a grandson when they saw him. For example, the 2 people in front of him. "Oh, it's okay. Come, let me introduce you. This is Jiang Hai, Mr. Jiang, a distinguished guest of our country." Hearing these 2 people, Li Shihuai nodded lightly, then took the initiative to stand up and introduce Jiang Hai, who was sitting in the main seat. "Mr. Jiang, hello, Smita. We are girls' generation's Kim Taeyeon, Lin Yun, Smita. Please take care of us." Hearing Li Shihuai's words, the 2 women were also very sensible. They immediately bowed to Jiang Hai and then said seriously. But Jiang Hai was a little confused. He was confused, naturally not because he saw his idol and didn't know what to do, but because he didn't understand. Chapter 8:25. Mr. Jiang is from Huaxia, not Korea, so you can speak Chinese or English to him. Seeing Jiang Hai's confused look, Cheryl Li also came over and translated into his ear. As for Li Shihuai, he immediately explained to the 2 puzzled women. After hearing this, the 2 women revealed a look of understanding, but then their faces became a little embarrassed. All right. Let's go. Let's go. Because in their group, some of them learned Chinese, some of them were good at English, and many of them came back from the United States. But the 2 of them were born and raised in South Korea. The so-called Chinese and English were only limited to introducing themselves. For general conversations, English was fine, but they almost couldn't speak Chinese. The most important thing was that everyone in South Korea knew it. The English they spoke may not be understood by foreigners because the accent was indeed a little strange. "Hello, my name is Kim Taeyeon, Lin Yun, we are from Girls' Generation." Looking at Jiang Hai, the 2 had to bite the bullet and introduce themselves with a serious face. Listening to their stiff Chinese, Jiang Hai also nodded. "Oh, I see, hello." Glancing at the 2, Jiang Hai also nodded and said in English. Hearing Jiang Hai's reply, the 2 were relieved, and then nodded again as a return of courtesy. "Mr. Jiang Hai is a very important friend of our country. Because he doesn't know much about our South Korean culture, the only people who know are you." In order to get closer to him, he specially asked the 2 of you to help communicate. "I think your company should have made it very clear." Hearing their words, Li Shihuai also said seriously. Hearing his words, the faces of the 2 were quite distressed. In fact, they really didn't want to come. What bridge of communication and so on, do you really think they don't understand? They are already in their 20s, almost 30. They knew better than anyone else what they were doing here. They were just here to drink with him. As for what they would do after drinking, that would depend on Jiang Hai's mood. Thinking of this, the 2 of them could not help but feel a little sad. After all, they were no longer so-called trainees. Although they were no longer at their peak, they were still at their peak. They had a large number of fans all over the world. However, South Korea's idol economy was like this, especially the girl groups. They were people who relied on youth to make a living. The entire South Korea market was only so big. When you were old and could not attract the mainstream group of 16 or 17-year-old girls, other girl groups would naturally rise up and become the new A-list idols. As for people like them who had once been glorious, it was inevitable that they would be pushed back. However, to be honest, the two of them did not mind being pushed back because they had already considered the problem of the future when they were glorious. Currently, the two of them were solo and their results were not bad. The other one specialized in acting. She originally wanted to develop the distant mainland of Hwaseong, and did well in the early stages. However, after Hwaseong recently issued a ban on South Korean stars, the acting girl's life instantly became difficult. However, based on what they had accumulated in the past, they did not have to worry about not being able to make money at all when they went for commercial performances. At most, they would earn less than in previous years, that was all. Therefore, even if there were some people who needed to entertain in the management company, even if they were domestic high-ranking officials, they could completely ignore them. However, today was different because Lee Shi-hwai had used the face of South Korea to find their company. If they did not come or angered these people, it would not just be a matter of being banned from the entertainment industry. Especially Lee Shi-hwai in front of them. As he said just now, he was a grandson in front of Jung Hae, because Jung Hae could ask him for $100 million at any time, but in the eyes of outsiders, he was a grandfather. This was an existence that could not be disobeyed. After receiving the text message, the company's representative even specially called the higher-ups. After all, they still had face. However, the higher-ups actually said that if Jung Hae took a fancy to them, it would be their blessing. They could become the bridge between South Korea and Jung Hae. That could not be better. After learning that the higher-ups meant this, the representative gave up and had no choice but to send them over. Because if they did not comply, they might face more than just being kicked out of the entertainment industry. Yes, we understand. Hearing Lee Shi-hwai's words, Kim Tae-yen lowered her head helplessly. They definitely had to come, but they were unwilling to give themselves up like this, but what could they do? They could only take one step at a time. Thinking of this, she could only bite her lip and say in a deep voice, "Come, sit next to Mr. Jung Hae." Hearing her words, Lee Shi-hwai couldn't help but smile, then motioned for them to sit over. Hearing Lee Shi-hwai's words, the two slowly walked in, then knelt on both sides of Jung Hae. Jung Hae was also a little confused when these two suddenly sat next to him. However, Jung Hae understood what this guy meant, but was he so easy to get rid of? "I think Mr. Lee, are you misunderstanding something? I don't have high paraplegia, so I don't seem to need others to feed me." Looking at the two people sitting on both sides, Jung Hae also chuckled, then picked up the teacup in front of him, took a sip of tea, and said to Lee Shi-hwai. He didn't buy it. Although a dragon's nature was something. But that was only when something was about to happen. Now, two people were suddenly stuffed to him, and he didn't know who they were. How could Jung Hae feel anything? No, I didn't mean that at all. I asked these two to come here mainly because you don't know much about our country, so it's easier to communicate with two people who you know a little about. At the same time, I can see that you don't know much about our food, so I need someone to introduce you. This is Miss Cheryl Lee. At first glance, I can tell that she has been abroad for a long time. She may not have the ability to do so. Seeing Jung Hae say so, Lee Shi-hwai immediately said. But when he said the first half of the sentence, he found that Cheryl Lee wanted to refute him, so he immediately said the next sentence to block her words. Seeing that Cheryl Lee didn't speak, Jung Hae also glanced at Lee Shi-hwai, then nodded. He naturally understood what this guy wanted to do, but he didn't need to object, right? Jung Hae also looked at the two people beside him. One of them was small, and the other had long black hair. As for whether they looked alike, Jiang Hai didn't comment. Although a dragon's nature was something, it was impossible for him to go berserk with such thick clothes. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't object, Li Shihuai also gestured to the two people. Seeing Li Shihuai's gaze, the small one picked up the teacup and poured water for Jiang Hai, while the long black hair picked up the lettuce and wrapped it up for Jiang Hai. But when Jiang Hai saw the things she wrapped up, he, who originally didn't have much appetite, lost his appetite even more. He saw that this woman had put whole cloves of garlic, perilla leaves, barbecued meat, rice, chili, grilled fish, and live octopus on top of the rice. She then mixed it with some barbecued meat sauce. Just like that, she was done. Although Jiang Hai wasn't a person who was obsessed with food, he didn't pay attention to the color, smell, and taste of food. After all, his favorite northeastern stew wasn't good looking, but what the hell was this? It was an insult to the darkness to call it dark cuisine. Wait a minute, this thing? How do you eat it? Jiang Hai waved his hand to stop the person from feeding him and asked her. Just eat it like this. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman froze for a moment. She blinked her big eyes and looked at Jiang Hai innocently. Looking at her, Jiang Hai really choked. Just eat it like this? Try it and let me see. Looking at her, Jiang Hai said to her. Oh. But it could be seen that she didn't seem to hear the dissatisfaction and ridicule in Jiang Hai's words. Instead, she directly stuffed the vegetable bun into her mouth. Then, as if she had eaten something delicious, she narrowed her eyes and made a sound of N. What the hell is this? Looking at her, Jiang Hai was completely confused. How can that thing be delicious? He didn't read much, so don't lie to him. Cough, that's how we eat in South Korea. Looking at Jiang Hai's face that was filled with a blank 13, Cheryl Lee awkwardly said. To be honest, when she came back a few days ago, she was also very surprised. But this is indeed how South Koreans eat this thing, it just looks a little scary. Hee, you guys eat it yourselves. I'll just eat something casually. I don't have the habit of being fed by others. Looking at the two, Jiang Hai said awkwardly. Then, he picked up a bowl of rice, dipped the roasted beef in barbecue sauce, and ate it just like that. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people here also glanced at Li Shihuai. How could Li Shihuai not see it at this time? Jiang Hai didn't like to eat these things. After reviewing this failed dinner party in his heart, he continued to say something with a smile. After the two saw that Li Shihuai didn't stop them, they also ate some things. To be honest, the meal prepared by Li Shihuai could definitely be regarded as the top delicacies in South Korea. No matter what the arrangement will be later, these two people have to eat until they are full. Especially the long straight black hair over there, the speed and appearance of eating scared Jiang Hai. Have they not eaten for a long time? Chapter 8:26. The dinner ended quickly. Jiang Hai got up and nodded at Li Shihuai, then returned to his suite with the other two. Jin Taiyan and Lin Yun, who had been eating just now, seemed to have realized that they weren't here to eat. For a moment, they were a little dazed. You two, come out with me for a moment. Looking at the two in front of him, Li Shihuai said with a cold face. Then, he led the two out of the room, to the elevator door, and found a place where they couldn't see each other. I think your superiors have already told you why you're here this time, right? The two people on the other side, one was guarding the elevator, and the other was guarding the front. Li Shihuai looked at the two people in front of him with a serious face. Yes, when we came, the representative accompanied us to eat with a guest. Hearing his words, Jin Taiyan braced herself and said. Hearing her words, Li Shihuai's face turned even uglier. Eat? Do I need you to eat with me? You're here to sleep with him. Don't say you don't know what this means. Hearing Jin Taikai's words, Li Shihuai directly interrupted her and roared at them in a low voice. We don't want to do this. Glancing at Li Shihuai, Jin Taiyan said with a little stubbornness. Now, It's not a matter of whether you want to or not, but a matter of whether you have to do this. This is a mission given to you by the higher-ups of South Korea. Do you know who that person is? He's Jung Hae. If you watch the news, you should know that our country recently detained a plane of that person, and the beef on the plane is worth $100 million. $100 million, do you understand what that means? That kind of chilled beef is guaranteed to last for 7 days. Today is already the 3rd day. In other words, we still have 3 days to transfer the beef to him. Otherwise, we don't have to pay $100 million. $100 million. Looking at the two people in front of him, Li Shihui was already a little hysterical. He absolutely couldn't accept this. Of course, in his words, he also changed the fact that he had to pay $100 million to the country. $100 million? Hearing the words of the person in front of them, Kim Tae-in and Lin Yuner were a little dazed. 120 billion won, oh my god, that man just now didn't seem to be such a powerful existence. Let me tell you, you can accompany him. This is your good fortune. That guy has a manor that earns him more than $2 billion a year from raising cattle, which is 2.4 trillion won. He earns about the same amount from selling fish, and now he's also selling grass. His annual income is definitely more than $6 billion. Because his company and manor are both private, Forbes can't estimate his net worth. But according to the evaluation of people in our country, as long as his manor continues to operate, his net worth can already be in the top 10 in the world. Letting you serve him is a chance for you to think about your future while he knows about you. Li Shihui tugged at his tie. Obviously, this guy was very familiar with using the method of giving a slap and then giving a sweet date. He used both soft and hard methods. But we. Hearing Li Shihui's words, the two women looked at each other. Although they really didn't expect Jung Hae to be such a rich person, they still couldn't accept offering themselves like this. Bullshit. Let me tell you, I don't care what method you use. Tomorrow, you must let me see him at the negotiating table. You must. This is a political task. If you can't complete it tomorrow, you will not have a place in South Korea. No, not only you, but also your family and friends will not have a place in South Korea. Whether you will exist in the Han River depends on whether you can run away or not. Do you understand? When Li Shihui heard that the two people in front of him were still hesitating, he instantly became furious. He grabbed their hair and roared with a face full of anger. Hearing Li Shihui's roar, the two people were completely scared silly. However, they knew that this was not a threat, nor was it a threat. It was a notice. If they did not do as they were told, then they really would not have any foothold in South Korea. This guy in front of them had this ability and also had this ability. He was a man of his word. You guys stay here and watch them. If they don't do as I say, you know what will happen. Letting go of the two's hair, Li Shihui snorted coldly and said to the two people next to him. After hearing Li Shihui's words, the two nodded seriously and then stood there. Looking at the appearance of the two, Kim Tae-in and Lin Yun understood that this time, they couldn't escape. In a country like South Korea, those rich people, trainees, or small celebrities, this could be said to be a very obvious thing. But they were different. From the moment they entered the company, they were the company's cash cow. Although they experienced some bad things later, such as the Black Sea incident, they had always been in the company's plan. Therefore, the company protected them very well in this aspect. After they became popular, naturally, no one dared to come over and ask them to do anything. Although their popularity had dropped now, no one could threaten them because they had grown wings and had money now. It was very difficult for topics like being banned from the entertainment industry to affect them. It could be said that except for the top existence in South Korea, no one could control their existence. But it was different now. Because now it wasn't those people who controlled them. Even though the Samsung Lee family had always joked that South Korea was the Samsung Lee family's South Korea, the Samsung Lee family didn't dare to go against the government in politics. It was even more impossible for them. Now, the whole of South Korea needed Jiang Hai's help. In the information they investigated, it was said that Jiang Hai was very fond of women. How could they not take advantage of it now? Under Li Shihuai's gaze, the two had no choice but to do it even if they didn't want to. They walked toward Jiang Hai's private room while looking back repeatedly. Now they were really scared and didn't have their own opinions, but what could they do? Uni, I'm scared. Lin Yuner, who was usually a carefree person, was also a little panicked at this time. However, she didn't realize that Jean Taiyen was even more panicked. She didn't know if it was because of the makeup or something else, but her face had become even paler at this time, almost drained of blood. However, they still had to walk step by step toward Jiang Hai's room. It wasn't a long road. They walked for about 15 minutes before reaching it, but they still felt that the road was too short. After reaching it, they glanced at the distance. The two people were still guarding there. They had no choice but to use their trembling right hands to gently knock on the door in front of them. After a long while, the door opened. The foreign woman they saw just now appeared in front of the door. After seeing them, she frowned first, then relaxed. Obviously, she also understood the purpose of the two people here. Cam Wang. She waved to the two people. The woman walked in first, and the two women also walked in slowly, looking back 3 times with each step. Then they closed the door and stood timidly at the door, looking around in horror. Why are you here? At this moment, the door of Jiang Hai's master bedroom opened. Jiang Hai, who had just taken a shower, walked out in a bathrobe. When he saw the two people, Jiang Hai was stunned. Ugh. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people were also stunned. How should they say it? They had never experienced it before. This is a gift from Li something today. Don't tell me you can't tell. At this time, Cheryl Li also walked out of Jiang Hai's master bedroom in a bathrobe. When she looked at Jean Taiyen and Lin Yuner, there was a trace of ridicule on her face. She was also present at the banquet just now. She naturally knew that the purpose of these two people here was nothing more than to serve Jiang Hai. I can see it, but I don't understand their expressions because their faces clearly say, I don't want to. Since they don't want to, why are they here? Hearing Cheryl Li's words, Jiang Hai shook his head, sat on the sofa in the living room, and then looked at the two people in front of him with some doubts. Not everyone in this world is as rich as you. There are some things that you can't do if you don't want to, right? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl also walked to Jiang Hai's side with a smile, then sat on Jiang Hai's lap. At the same time, she winked at the two people, which was also a declaration of sovereignty. Sir Li said that he hopes that you can participate in the negotiation tomorrow. Hearing Cheryl's words, Jean Taiyen and Lin Yuner were about to cry. They looked at Jiang Hai with a pitiful expression. Fortunately, they still remembered why they came. If Jiang Hai was a good person and easy to talk to, perhaps they didn't need to do that kind of thing. But it was a pity that their thinking was still too simple. If Jiang Hai was really a good person, there wouldn't be such a scene now. I don't plan to go to the negotiation tomorrow. My plane has a total of 30 tons of beef. The wholesale price is about $20 million, and the profit price is about $40 million. But if I leave it there and let it rot, I can get $100 million. Even if I don't get 100 million, I'm confident that I can at least earn 80 million. Excluding legal fees and my own expenses, I still have a net profit of $30 million. Tell me, what reason do I have to give up this money? Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said calmly to the two people. And after hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people's faces turned even uglier. Chapter 8:27. In fact, the best way to slap Jiang Hai's face right now was to directly ask, is this a lot of money? We'll give you the money. But unfortunately, these two couldn't say it out loud. $1 is equivalent to 1,200 Korean won. 30 million, that's 36 billion Korean won. What does 36 billion mean? Lee Seung-gi has been popular for several years. His total net worth is 5 to 6 billion Korean won, and this is his own. In other words, the money he earns is shared with him and his company. Under such circumstances, he only has this much money. Girls' Generation was indeed very popular a few years ago. Although Jiang Hai didn't know, they were still very popular in Asia. After changing the contract, they earned a lot. But before that, they divided it among 9 people. Before that, it was reported that they could earn 30 billion Korean won a year. But the contract with South Korea's management company, Hehe, even if it was divided according to 30%, 10 billion Korean won for 9 people. That's more than a billion Korean won per person, and they still have to pay taxes. From 2009 until the large-scale exposure of relationships in 2014, they were considered a top girl group. They had made a fortune for 6 years. So after so many years, they could be considered as their own real estate. It was already not bad for each of them to have a net worth of nearly 10 billion Korean won. Now that Jiang Hai was talking about 36 billion Korean won, they really couldn't take out that much money. And even if they can afford it, they may not be willing to do so. They worked so hard to earn so much money. Do they want to go back to square one? They looked at each other. Their eyes were full of helplessness. Is there no room for negotiation? We don't have that much money. Looking at Jiang Hai, Kim Tae-in finally gritted her teeth and said helplessly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled, and Cheryl Lee also smiled. You say that you don't have the money, and you're not going to do anything. What makes you think you can make Jiang Hai give in? It's really funny. Looking at the 2 people in front of her, Cheryl Lee said with a funny face. Hearing Cheryl Lee's words and recalling Lee Shihui outside the door, the 2 were really speechless. They must make a decision. If this matter was not settled, then what Lee Shihui said outside might become true. Their careers and the safety of their families were placed in front of them. This really made them feel that they had no choice. The conversation between them was in Korean, so Jiang Hai couldn't understand it at all. He just stood there and watched them talk. If Jiang Hai knew what they were talking about, he would probably laugh. He wasn't the kind of person who would give face and earn 30 million less just because of 2 artists. After all, he wasn't their fan. If something really happened between them, to be honest, it would be troublesome. This was because Jiang Hai didn't want to give up the money, and he didn't want to eat it all. Even if he didn't want to, he would still feel distressed. However, Cheryl Lee didn't know what Jiang Hai was thinking, and Azalina wouldn't say it. If Chi Jia and the others were here, they would definitely understand Jiang Hai's thoughts, but Cheryl Lee couldn't. Her acquaintance with Jiang Hai was actually a misunderstanding. After all, she wasn't Jiang Hai's woman, but Pra Walton's. Oni. Hearing Cheryl Lee's aggressive words, Lin Yun couldn't help but panic. She looked at Jean Tien and said nervously. She wasn't alone now, she still had her boyfriend. It was really a coincidence. Her boyfriend was Lee Seung-gi, who offended Jiang Hai at the airport today. But now she didn't know about this. She only knew that she wanted to keep her job, protect her family, and not betray her boyfriend. So now she was a little panicked. She couldn't help but hold Jean Tien's hand and whisper. Looking at her deer-like eyes that were about to cry, Jean Tien sighed helplessly. In fact, she also had a boyfriend before, although that boyfriend was more of a hype than a relationship. But after all, she had also invested a little in that relationship. However, they had separated a few days ago. Now, she was alone. If sacrificing herself could save her career, her family, and Lin Yun, then she, thinking of this, Jean Tien gritted her teeth and slowly took a step forward. She looked at Jiang Hai and Cheryl in front of her. I can, please let Yun go. She has a better future, and... Looking at Jiang Hai and Cheryl Lee in front of her, Jean Tien bit her lips and said. Now they couldn't avoid it, so she was ready to sacrifice herself. Oni, you can't. Seeing Jean Taiyen was ready to sacrifice herself, Lin Yun panicked and immediately pulled her back. This won't do. You two came in, and only one of you expressed sincerity. What does this mean? But it was a pity that the loving scene between the two sisters had touched Cheryl Lee's heart. She wouldn't let them off easily. She let out a cold snort and said to them calmly. Upon hearing Cheryl Lee's words, the two of them couldn't help but tremble. If you don't want to, the door is behind you. Jiang Hai won't force you to do anything. Seeing the two stunned girls, Cheryl Lee couldn't help saying with a chuckle. Hearing her words, the two girls knew that they had no way out. I hope you can keep your words. After thinking for a while, as if she had made up her mind, Lin Yun, who had been hesitating just now, bit her lips and took a step forward. Then she took off her coat and began to unbutton her shirt. Looking at her tearful gaze, Jean Taiyen seemed to have sensed her will. Gritting her teeth, Jean Taiyen also took a step forward and began to take off her coat. Looking at their movements, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. I didn't say I wanted them to do this. Looking at the firm gaze of the two, Jiang Hai immediately asked Cheryl Lee. I thought you liked them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee was also stunned. How about I tell them to stop? Looking at the two grief-stricken women over there, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but smile brightly. Then, she whispered to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai curled his lips helplessly. The two of them were about to be naked. If Jiang Hai were to say that he was just teasing them, wouldn't that be nonsense? Looking at Jiang Hai's gaze, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but smile awkwardly. It seemed that she was thinking too much. $30 million in profit. She also knew that this wasn't a small amount, but fortunately, Cheryl Lee's mind worked quickly. The only thing she could do now was to properly train them and let Jiang Hai feel that the $30 million were worth it. At this moment, the two on the other side had also finished their preparations. Then, two naked figures appeared in front of Jiang Hai and Cheryl Lee. However, they were both blocking their private parts. Their faces were also red as they looked into the distance. It had to be admitted that perhaps because of their years of dancing, their figures were really good. The girls in Jiang Hai's manor also had good figures. Compared to them, these two weren't inferior at all. Next, here's the chance to show your sincerity. Do whatever I do. Looking at the two people in front of her, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but smile. Then, under Jiang Hai's puzzled gaze, she knelt down in front of him and took out the thing that Jiang Hai couldn't describe before swallowing it. Seeing this scene, the two people couldn't help but breathe heavily. They had never experienced such a thing before. This kind of thing. Oh my God. Next, it's your turn. After about 5 minutes, Cheryl Lee raised her head again and said to the two in front of her. Since they had already made up their minds, under Cheryl Lee's urging, the two slowly walked over and knelt in front of Jiang Hai. Jean Taiyen opened her mouth and finally put her mouth on it in shame. But as soon as she touched it, she turned her head and lay on the ground. Although Jiang Hai had just finished bathing, she couldn't bear the smell. Oni. Looking at Jean Taiyen's appearance, Lin Yun's tears finally couldn't help but flow down. But she still put her mouth on it and took the initiative to swallow it. The taste instantly made her want to vomit, but she endured it. Don't just stand there, use your tongue flexibly. You're really stupid. And you, don't just stand there and spit. Come here, these two things are yours. Looking at the two people in front of her, Cheryl Lee loudly said. Why don't we just forget about it? Upon hearing Cheryl Lee's words, the two of them shuddered and moved closer to her. Jiang Hai also saw the resistance in their eyes and couldn't help but say. Alright, let's just forget about it. How can we forget about it? This is $30 million. Just enjoy it. Listen to me today. Tomorrow, I'll arrange some fun things for you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee also knew that she was wrong, so she said to Jiang Hai. Now, all she could do was to make Jiang Hai as happy as possible. We can't forget about it. It's already like this. If we forget about it, what are we? Remember what you promised us. Hearing the conversation between the two, Jean Taiyan also raised her head at this moment and looked at Jiang Hai. A trace of determination flashed in her eyes, and then she took the initiative to lean on him. For them, since they had made up their minds to take this step, there was no turning back. Looking at their eyes, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say now. Chapter 828. The autumn sunshine of South Korea shone through the thick curtains into Jiang Hai's bedroom. Feeling the sunshine, Jiang Hai also opened his eyes in a daze. Compared to the jet lag of most people, Jiang Hai was fine. When he opened his eyes, he also saw the women lying in his arms on both sides. These two women were the ones who made up their minds last night. Looking at the makeup on their faces that was ruined by tears, Jiang Hai also let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that he did not control the power from the primitive world last night. These two girls should have been tormented quite badly. After stretching his neck, Jiang Hai slowly pulled his arms out from under their necks, then took his clothes and left the room. After closing the door of the room, Jiang Hai couldn't help but scratch his head with a headache. To be honest, Jiang Hai was not interested in them at first. In fact, until now, he still couldn't remember their names. Originally, this matter was very simple. Jiang Hai didn't care who took the money from South Korea. He was determined to take the money. This was also the price they had to pay for detaining his plane. But now, after last night's incident, Jiang Hai really couldn't say anything. After all, he was not the kind of person who was so heartless that he would turn his face away after doing something. Therefore, he was definitely going to lose this money. Although he didn't care much about the 30 million, he still felt some heartache when talking about it. You're up. Watching Jiang Hai leave the room, Cheryl Lee, who had gotten up early, was sitting on the sofa in the living room at this time, watching a Korean drama. When she heard the sound of Jiang Hai opening the door, she also looked at Jiang Hai and said apologetically. She knew that because of her, Jiang Hai lost a lot yesterday. Although she had tried her best to make Jiang Hai happy last night, compared with real money, the bodies of the three women didn't seem to be worth it. Oh, what are you looking at? After rubbing his hair, Jiang Hai put on his clothes and sat next to Cheryl Lee. He was not in a hurry to wash up. He wanted to talk to her first. I didn't see anything. I'm sorry about last night. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee decided to apologize to Jiang Hai. It's okay, forget it. After all, I also got some benefits. If you really feel guilty, then take me out to play today. Looking at Cheryl Lee in front of him, Jiang Hai also said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee was relieved. As long as Jiang Hai didn't blame her, that was the best. I've already made the arrangements. We'll go to the South Gate first, then to Jingfu Palace, and then to Tsinghua Terrace. If there's still time, we'll go to Ming Cave. After dinner, we can go to Nanshan. It's very nice to take the cable car there at night. Then, I'll organize a party at Bao Ting. There are many beautiful women there, Cheryl Lee said immediately after hearing Jiang Hai's words. It could be seen that she really wanted to take Jiang Hai out to play. At this moment, the door to Azalina's room opened, and three people walked out. We're going out to play in a while. Are you coming too? Looking at the three people here, Jiang Hai asked them. Let Azalina protect you. We won't go. After all, you're not that popular here. When you go out to play, try to be careful. Don't go to places with too many people. Azalina looked at Jiang Hai and said calmly. This was not because they were looking for excuses or because they were angry. It was because this was their working state. Jiang Hai knew very well that he was not that popular in South Korea. The pressure on the shoulders of these three people was still very heavy. Okay, we'll do as you say. By the way, Tell them in a while that we'll contact the people of South Korea to negotiate today. Also, if the two women in the room have any requests, try to satisfy them if it's not too troublesome. Jiang Hai was a person who always paid attention to an equivalent exchange. Although the two women accompanied him yesterday because of the pressure from above, it was still not enough. But after all, something had happened between them, so Jiang Hai couldn't say much. However, it was not his character to completely ignore them. Although he didn't even know the names of the two women, it didn't prevent him from giving more instructions. We got it. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina also said something. After that, Jiang Hai went to wash up. After washing up, he, Cheryl, and Azalina went to the hotel's breakfast restaurant to have breakfast, then borrowed a hotel car to leave the hotel and go out to play. As one of the most luxurious hotels in Seoul, the Shilla Hotel naturally had many luxury cars. But for Jiang Hai, those luxury cars were not necessary, so he just borrowed a modern jeans and left. The price of this car in China is more than 300,000 yuan. It's not very eye-catching on the streets of South Korea. Cheryl Lee drove the car, took Jiang Hai and the others out of the hotel, and went to the place she booked. Less than half an hour after they left, the two women in the room also woke up. When they opened their eyes, they saw each other and saw the sadness, despair, and shame in each other's eyes. The two of them still had some memories due to the strange state of their bodies and the fragments of what happened last night. However, to them, these memories were nothing but humiliation. The atmosphere in the room was extremely oppressive for a moment. More than 10 minutes passed unknowingly. Kim Taeyin sat up first and then began to put on her clothes. Lin Yuner saw this scene and also put on her clothes. The two quietly put on their clothes. After everything was done, they opened the door and walked out. As soon as they walked out, they saw Huali fiddling with the computer in the distance. Oh. You're awake. Seeing the two get up, Huali also smiled and said to them. Oh, hello, where are they? Seeing Huali ask them, the two immediately nodded. Although they were not used to it, she still wanted to ask. After all, they didn't accompany them for nothing last night. Oh, they have already gone out, but you can rest assured. Jiang Zhou told us that the people in the team are already in contact with the higher-ups of South Korea. Hearing her words, Huali on the other side also said. That's good. Hearing Huali's words, the two women breathed a sigh of relief. As long as Jiang Hai kept his word, their sacrifice was not in vain. Thinking of their family and career, losing some other things was also acceptable. Although it may become a permanent pain in their hearts. You have to be more open-minded. In fact, Jiang Hai is still a very good person. He also specifically told us that if you have any requests or troubles, you can tell him and he will help you solve it. Here, this is his phone number. If there is anything, you can contact him at any time. Looking at the two in front of her, Huali also handed over 2 business cards and said with a smile. After receiving the business cards, the two really didn't know what to do. This night, was it just for this thing? Thinking of this, the two couldn't help but smile bitterly, but they still put away the business cards, then nodded, put on their shoes, and left the hotel. When they got into the elevator, the two women were a little numb. Jean Taeyin was okay, she was just very sad, but Lin Yuner was still a little numb because she didn't know how to face her lover. She felt very dirty now, but in order to save her job and her family, she had to do this. Looking at her grief-stricken face, Jean Taeyin sighed. She didn't know how to persuade her at this time. Things had already happened. The only thing they could do was to forget this as soon as possible. After all, Jiang Hai wouldn't stay here for long. As long as this matter was over, everything would be over. But there were many coincidences in the world. He wasn't someone you could just pass by if you wanted to. After learning that he had offended Jiang Hai yesterday, Li Xingji used all his connections and finally found out that Jiang Hai was staying at the Shilla Hotel. So he came here early this morning to wait for Jiang Hai, hoping to please Jiang Hai so that Jiang Hai wouldn't hate him. Unfortunately, he didn't come at the right time. Jiang Hai just left in the morning. When he wanted to ask Jiang Hai's floor in the lobby, the elevator just reached the first floor. When the two women saw Li Xingji in front of them, the two women were stunned. Li Xingji was also stunned. Early in the morning, his girlfriend's hair was a little messy, and her clothes weren't very neat. Li Xingji wasn't a child. Suddenly, he felt that he seemed to be a little green. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know about this. Because after he ordered this matter, according to his thoughts, he shouldn't meet with the two women again. So he was still very happy in soul. Jiang Hai went to the scenic spots mentioned by Cheryl Lee. But to be honest, these things were just a so-so. The so-called South Gate was just a gate. What national treasure? There was really nothing to see. Jianbokgung was more or less a building complex. He could take a look at it. Chongwadi wasn't allowed to enter, but it was the only place in Seoul where he could see the police. After looking around, Cheryl Lee took Jiang Hai and the others to eat a South Korean barbecue at noon. After eating the barbecue, they continued to stroll in the afternoon. But there weren't many places to visit. Chapter 829. Myeongdong was a landmark in South Korea in the eyes of many fans of Korean dramas. Because there were many Korean dramas that would be filmed here, the business street that was originally not very popular unknowingly became very popular. In Myeongdong, all the shops required waiters who could speak Chinese. These people were prepared for the Chinese tourists. It can be said that over the year, more than 80% of the transactions in Myeongdong were from Chinese tourists. There were very few Southern Caucasians who would come here to buy things. Compared to the South Gate and East Gate, the sales here were much higher. But there was an important problem. Other than some super department stores, the so-called luxury goods sold here were actually more of South Korea's local brands. The most famous foreign brand was Zara. Zara was a Spanish brand. To be honest, the Spanish people did not earn as much as Huaxia people. In Europe, it was rare to find someone who could earn more than Huaxia. Of course, this was referring to the purchasing rate. There were not many young people who could earn more than 2,000 euros a month overseas. Of course, this was after tax. In China, there were not many young people who could earn more than 2,000 euros a month. After all, the starting salary in China was about 3,000 euros. So, the big brands in Spain were just a so-so. That was why not many South Koreans came to Myeongdong. Most of them were foreign tourists. Jiang Hai and the others strolled around the place and then left. Even if they were women, it was very difficult for them to have the impulse to buy things here. After all, Jiang Hai's family lived in the United States. What they bought there was cheaper than here, and the quality was better than here. What was there to buy there? After walking around Myeongdong, they went to Nanshan. Nanshan Park in South Korea was a landmark building. The most famous building was Nanshan Pagoda. This place was also popular because of Korean dramas and the like. But Jiang Hai came over to take a look. To be honest, there was nothing fun about this old park. The whole tower was only 200 meters high. Compared to the 500 or 600 meter towers in China, there was a big difference. And the whole Nanshan Hill, it was more accurate to say that it was a hill. Jiang Hai came from Ice City in the plains, but in his view, Nanshan Hill was a hill, not to mention his friends from the south. But there were some die-hard fans who liked this place very much. When Jiang Hai and the others went to play, there were people taking selfies everywhere. If you want to take a selfie, then take a good selfie. After all, this place was also a scenic spot. If you want to do something about it, then do something about it. Jiang Hai could only laugh at this. After walking around Nanshan Pagoda for a while, they went directly to the revolving Western restaurant on the 5th floor for dinner. Then, Jiang Hai and the rest drove directly to Bayou Ting. The so-called Bayou Ting did not refer to a hotel or a building. It referred to an area. The city of South Korea was divided into areas at the beginning. Below the area was a cave. They did not understand why it was divided into caves, but this was how it was divided. Baoting Cave, compared to Myeongdong, was also a trendy distribution center. But compared to Myeongdong, which was mostly tourists, there were more local tourists in South Korea here. This was basically a place where the so-called elites and petty bourgeoisie gathered. In addition to the famous brands, there were many cafes, restaurants with specialties from different countries, beauty shops, and so on. At the same time, there were many South Korean companies here. It was normal to meet some celebrities here. But to be honest, it was not a big deal to meet a celebrity in South Korea because there were really too many celebrities in South Korea. They relied on this to push up their economy. In addition to these things, of course, there were also some high-end nightclubs and high-end bars. This was because during the day, the main customers here were fashionable women in their 20s. Where there were women, there would naturally be men. Where there were men, there would be demand. So when it was night time, the nightclubs here were also quite chaotic. Jiang Hai said that he did not like to go to nightclubs because he did not like to be too noisy, but he was still somewhat interested in the place arranged by Cheryl Lee. After the car was parked, Jiang Hai and the rest walked into the nightclub that Cheryl Lee had arranged in advance. As soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai was shocked by the lively atmosphere. He had to admit that the people of South Korea really liked to go to nightclubs. Many of the dance songs were from South Korea. The musicians here also particularly liked to play electronic music and dance music. When Jiang Hai came, it was almost 10 o'clock in the evening. It was the time when people were having the most fun. Countless strangely dressed young men and women were doing their best to dance on the dance floor. Regardless of whether it was plastic surgery or not, Jiang Hai glanced around. The quality of the girls here was quite good. They had the face and the figure. When they danced, they might have been influenced by some girl groups, so their dance steps were quite cough cough. Forcibly withdrawing his gaze, Jiang Hai followed the waiter to the second floor. The private room booked by Cheryl was on the second floor. The private room on the second floor facing the stage was the one she booked. After they sat down, a waiter came over and asked them what they wanted. Although Jiang Hai did not like this kind of environment, he was still quite interested in drinking. So he ordered 2 bottles of wine, a lot of beer, a fruit plate, snacks, and so on. Not long after, those things were served. Cheryl had been texting ever since she sat in the private room. Jiang Hai stood in front of the window, looking at the dancing crowd below. Although he would not go over and dance with them, it did not prevent Jiang Hai from looking. Just as Jiang Hai was fascinated by the scene, 3 women came in from outside. As soon as they entered the private room, they happily greeted Cheryl Lee. At the same time, they looked at Jiang Hai and Azalina with some caution. They gently nodded, then looked at Cheryl Lee with some doubts. At this time, Jiang Hai was also looking at them. He had to admit that the 3 girls who came in were quite good-looking. 2 of them were nearly 1.7 meters tall, and one of them was about 1.6 meters tall. They were all wearing tight one-step dresses, outlining their perfect figures, especially the tallest girl. Her indescribable place and waist were completely disproportionate, giving Jiang Hai a sense of déjà vu of the South Korean version of Wallace. "Come and sit down first." "Jiang Hai, come over too. Let me introduce you. This is Jiang Hai, a rich man from Hwaseong in the United States. His wealth is far beyond your imagination. This is his bodyguard." Seeing that the 3 people seemed to be a little embarrassed, Cheryl Lee immediately pulled them over and introduced them with a smile. After hearing Cheryl Lee's words, the 3 people here were stunned for a moment. Because Jiang Hai doesn't seem to be a rich man. After introducing Jiang Hai, she directly introduced the 3 people here, which were her so-called bureau. This girl in a tight suit is called Lee Xiaobin, an online streamer and a model. This is Sun Yunju, also a model. This is Een Suan, an online streamer. I heard that she recently signed a contract with Huaxia's platform. Looking at Jiang Hai, Cheryl Lee also introduced the three people in front of her. Annyeonghaseyo, hello. After hearing Cheryl's words, Yin Soon greeted Jiang Hai with her strange Mandarin. Jiang Hai also responded with a smile. Annyeonghaseyo, I'm really sorry. I was streaming just now, so I came late. Hearing Jiang Hai also speak, Li Xiaobin also said with a smile, but she spoke in English. She can also communicate with Jiang Hai if she can speak English. It doesn't matter, we just arrived. Do you want to drink anything? Wine or drinks? Looking at the three people in front of him, Jiang Hai also smiled. The beauties apologized, and they didn't come too late. Jiang Hai didn't care, but asked them. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, the three beauties looked at each other, then they couldn't help but laugh. Mr. Jiang, you don't come to this kind of place often, right? At this time, Sun Yunju, who was sitting in the middle, asked Jiang Hai. I don't come here often. I don't like noisy places. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai touched his nose a little awkwardly. He really didn't understand these things. Generally, boys don't ask girls if they want to drink when they come here. From this, it can be seen that Mr. Jiang is a good person. At this time, Yin Soon also said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was even more at a loss. Am I labeled as a good person just like this? Let's drink beer. Come on, cheers. At this time, Cheryl also came over, opened a few bottles of beer and stuffed them into the hands of these girls, then said with a smile. Hearing Cheryl's words, the girls here also raised the beer bottles in their hands. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai also smiled softly. If they want to drink, then drink. Anyway, it's not like he can't afford it. After several bottles touched together, everyone also took a big sip. Jiang Hai also tasted South Korea's beer for the first time. How should he put it? The taste was not very good, but it was barely drinkable. The beer that Jiang Hai and the others drank was called Height Hit. It was not cheap, but the taste was really ordinary. The alcohol content was a little high, and it was not strong. The bitter taste was very strong. No wonder in South Korea, soju was much better than beer. Chapter 830. What kind of business does Mr. Jiang do? After drinking a few mouthfuls of beer, these girls were more relaxed and began to wander around the room. Cheryl Lee also took them to play. At this time, Li Xiaobin, who had been paying attention to Jiang Hai just now, came over and said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at this woman. Even if Jiang Hai had seen so many delicate flowers, this woman could be rated above 90 points in Jiang Hai's eyes. Whether it was because of makeup or plastic surgery, Jiang Hai didn't plan to spend a long time with her anyway, so objectively speaking, this woman was very good-looking. She had an oval face, slender and big eyes, 2 reclining silkworms, a tall nose, a small mouth, long hair dyed half blonde, coupled with a slender neck and beautiful collarbones, and of course, the most important 2 brutal forces. She was indeed a weapon that could harvest otakus on the internet. Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at her. Oh, I raise cattle in the United States. Jiang Hai quietly picked up the beer and took a sip. He wasn't the kind of person who couldn't take his eyes off something. Before he went berserk, his self-control was still very strong. Raise cattle? Does this make money? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Xiaobin was stunned for a moment, then asked with some doubts. In fact, just like ordinary people, if ordinary people say that they raise cattle, people may not think that they have much money. This Li Xiaobin was the same. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, she couldn't help but have some doubts. Oh, it's okay. Touching his nose, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Although he wouldn't hide his wealth, he wouldn't show off for no reason. This was not in line with his character. Moreover, even if he said that he raised cattle and fish and made billions of dollars a year, these people would have to believe it. Oh, I see. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Xiaobin smiled awkwardly and unconsciously moved back. To be honest, for women at their level, money was not the most important thing. For example, Yin Suan, who was next to him, had signed a contract with Hua Xia's live streaming platform. It was said that just the signing fee alone was astronomical. In China, a first-class streamer could earn millions or even tens of millions of RMB a year. These people might not be the top streamers, but they definitely earned a lot. On average, each of the 3 people present had an annual income of nearly 10 million renminbi. According to the current exchange rate, 10 million renminbi was equivalent to 1.6 billion won. In South Korea, the top celebrities only earned this much in a year, and they still had to pay the management company. However, they only needed to pay some to their own team. Although this industry was purely based on youth, it could also be said that they were not short of money. The reason why they came here this time was mainly because of their relationship with Cheryl. Although they were not short of money, they lacked fame and connections. They knew a little about the relationship between Cheryl and Prawalton. In their opinion, the friend she wanted to introduce should also be a celebrity in the United States. If they could make friends with such a celebrity and have some in-depth exchanges, they would have some feelings in the future. If something happened to them in South Korea, it was very important to have someone who could protect them abroad. But now that Jiang Hai said that he was just a cattle farmer and had no ability, they couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. I'm going to the bathroom. After thinking for a while, Li Xiaobin smiled and said to Jiang Hai. After putting down the beer bottle, she went to the side and pulled Cheryl Li, who was still looking for something to play, into the bathroom of the private room. After seeing her movements, the other 2 people also subconsciously followed her. As soon as she walked in, she locked the door and looked at Cheryl with an unhappy face. What's the matter? Looking at her gaze, Sun Yunju first looked at her in confusion, then asked her. The big boss outside is a cattle farmer? Hearing Sun Yunju's words, Li Xiaobin ignored her and continued to ask Cheryl. As soon as she heard what she said, Cheryl understood what she wanted to say and couldn't help but smile disdainfully. You're too anxious. And you guys, when you ask him later, don't leak anything. If you ask him, he will definitely say that he is a cattle farmer. But this is not wrong, he is indeed a cattle farmer. Hearing Li Xiaobin's question, Cheryl couldn't help but smile and said. Hearing that the person they were going to accompany today was a cattle farmer, Yin Suan and Sun Yunju frowned. They didn't come here to accompany a farmer. But this guy is a cattle farmer. However, although this guy is a farmer, he's actually very rich. The cows he raises can be sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. He has tens of thousands of cows and can make several $billion a year just by selling cows. He also has a huge fishing farm. I've been to his seaside and heard that he can sell fish for several $billion a year. Recently, I've heard that he can also sell grass for several $billion. Seeing the 3 women frowning, Cheryl couldn't help but giggle and say. Hearing Cheryl's words, the 3 women looked at each other. They could clearly see a trace of distrust in each other's eyes. Since when could one earn so much from raising cows and fish? And it was calculated in hundreds of millions? Moreover, you should have heard about his relationship with the Walmart Group. He also has a close relationship with a prince of Dubai. At the same time, he also has some connections with several tycoons in the United States. I heard that he is also a shareholder of Google. Alas, originally, I wanted to find a way out for you since we have a good relationship. But I didn't expect you to doubt me. Looking at the 3 women in front of her, Cheryl Li chuckled and proudly raised her head. Seeing Cheryl Li's appearance, the 3 women couldn't help but laugh. They didn't care about losing face in front of Cheryl. As long as they could get what they wanted, everything else didn't matter. After discussing in the bathroom, the 4 women left together. After returning to the private room, the 3 women were clearly more interested in Jiang Hai. Even Cheryl Li was pushed to the side. Looking at the scene in front of her, Cheryl Li didn't care. She was the one who invited the three women to accompany Jiang Hai. The more they drank, the more they drank. It was said that it was easy to do that after getting drunk. When a man wanted to do something with a woman, he would force her to drink. When a woman wanted to do something with a man, she would force them to drink. When a woman wanted to do something with a man, she would also force them to drink. Obviously, these women wanted to force Jiang Hai to drink. But unfortunately, even if it was a test of alcohol, it was impossible for them to force Jiang Hai to drink. When the alcohol that Jiang Hai ordered was almost finished, Jiang Hai's consciousness was still very clear. However, the three women seemed to have drunk too much. Of course, whether they were really drunk or not, Jiang Hai didn't know. But at this time, they were making noise about how hot it was. From time to time, they tore their clothes, revealing some things that couldn't be described. They also took the initiative to entangle Jiang Hai and whisper to him. Although Jiang Hai couldn't understand 9 out of 10 sentences, it didn't prevent him from understanding what these women meant. After being teased for so long, Jiang Hai felt that he was gradually losing his senses. It seemed that he would have to sleep late tonight. At this time, in the hall on the first floor, the atmosphere had reached its peak. After the live DJ played a few fireworks, several women ran out from the backstage. As soon as they saw these women, the people below became even crazier. Wow, this bar is very awesome. Today, they invited Hello Venus. Looking at the stage below, Yin Suan said with a smile, but hearing her words, Jiang Hai had some doubts because he didn't know what this was. Hello Venus is the name of a group. They debuted in 2012 and have never been very popular. At first, they were suppressed by Xiaoshi and TRR. Now, it is the era of AOA. They have never been popular, so they disbanded in 2014, but I heard that they are looking for opportunities to return to the stage recently. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, Sun Yunju also explained to Jiang Hai. Oh, that's it. Although he said this, to be honest, Jiang Hai really didn't know what the hell it was. At this time, the girls on the dance floor below had finished their opening remarks. The music sounded, and they were ready to dance. Wow, it's Wiggle, I can dance this. Hearing the music, Li Xiaobin couldn't help but jump up with a smile. She said to Jiang Hai with a happy face, then came to the middle of the private room. Tisk, as if no one can dance. Come, let's dance together. After hearing her words, Yin Suan and Sun Yunju also came over. After the three women looked at each other, they laughed. As the music sounded, the three of them bent down at the same time and delivered the indescribable thing that was perfectly wrapped in a one-step skirt to Jiang Hai. Ugh! Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai was a little confused. What's going on? Fortunately, he quickly understood that these were dance moves. However, he had to admit that the dance steps of the Southern Gaoli were indeed terrifying. Every step was like the claws and teeth of a devil. If young people were to see this, they would definitely suffer from malnutrition. It seems that the compulsory military service of South Korea should be related to these women's groups. When they can't stand it anymore, they have to go to the army to recuperate for 2 years. Otherwise, no matter how many eggs you have, you will not be able to stand it. Chapter 831. Hiss, I can't stand it anymore. Let's go back. Before the dance in front of him was finished, Jiang Hai already couldn't stand it anymore, so his eyes lit up and he said to Cheryl Lee next to him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee also rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai, then clapped her hands and gestured to the three girls. Then the three girls came over with a smile and began to pack their things. Jiang Hai naturally took advantage of them while they were packing their things. But instead of saying that Jiang Hai took advantage of them, it was better to say that they deliberately let Jiang Hai take advantage of them. After fooling around for about 10 minutes, they finished packing, but Jiang Hai's car certainly couldn't accommodate these 6 people. Although Jiang Hai didn't mind one of them sitting on him, the police would mind. So Jiang Hai thought for a while. He and Cheryl Lee took a taxi back. After all, he needed someone who could speak Korean to follow him. Azalina took them back to Jiang Hai's room in the Shilla Hotel first. Because if they wanted to take a taxi, it would be troublesome to meet them on the street now. Therefore, Cheryl Lee specially called for a taxi so that they could wait downstairs. As for Azalina and the others, they left first. After about 5 minutes, Cheryl's phone rang. The taxi had arrived. Then the two walked downstairs and prepared to go out and take a taxi back. But just when Jiang Hai was about to walk to the exit, he suddenly found a woman at a bar table in the distance. She seemed to have drunk too much and was lying on the table. Beside her, there were many men who always inadvertently walked past her table. This South Korea is really messy. Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai chuckled. He wasn't going to meddle in other people's business. At this moment, a person who looked like a gangster finally couldn't help it. He walked in front of the woman and prepared to take her away. This woman may still have some consciousness, so she resisted. This resistance caused the hair on her face to move to the side, revealing her face. When he saw her face, Jiang Hai froze for a moment, because he was very familiar with this face. To be exact, just 5 minutes ago, this face was still in front of his eyes. Sun Yunju? Looking at this woman, Jiang Hai couldn't help but gawk. Didn't she just leave with Azalina? Did Azalina suddenly throw a tantrum, so she left her here? And the clothes she is wearing are not the same. What the hell is this? Just as Jiang Hai was puzzled, Cheryl Lee over there also saw this person. Ah, it's Sun Yunju. Jiang Hai, hurry up. You can't take her away. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was no longer puzzled. Cheryl Lee and Sun Yunju were also friends. She shouldn't be mistaken. So Jiang Hai took 2 steps forward and went directly to the person who was about to take her away again. Boy, what are you doing? This sentence was in English. After Jiang Hai finished speaking, he took a step forward and said to this person with a fierce face. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person was stunned for a moment, and then a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. He didn't know if it was because he had a guilty conscience, or because he was afraid of Jiang Hai's height, or because Jiang Hai spoke in English, which shocked him. Seeing Jiang Hai coming over, this person said a string of Korean that Jiang Hai didn't understand, then slowly retreated. Let's go. After seeing Jiang Hai intimidating that person, Cheryl Lee also came over, stroked the woman, and said in her ear. Perhaps hearing a woman's voice, this woman who was 80% drunk no longer struggled, but directly fell on Cheryl Lee. Cheryl Lee was Pa Walton's girlfriend. Jiang Hai's beef and fish were naturally enough to eat. Every time Pa Walton came to slaughter a cow, Jiang Hai would give her a free cow for them to eat. Although a cow was more than 100,000 yuan, Jiang Hai wouldn't be stingy with these things. Therefore, although Cheryl Lee wasn't tall and had a slender figure, her strength wasn't small. Without Jiang Hai's help, she could carry the woman in front of her. Of course, Jiang Hai wouldn't let her carry her like this. So after Jiang Hai scared away that person, he took the initiative to take the woman and walked outside. Carrying her like a princess, Jiang Hai also looked at this woman carefully. The more he looked at Jiang Hai, the more he felt that something was wrong. Because although this woman looked very similar to Sun Yunju, she seemed to be a little older, and her figure wasn't so good. Most importantly, there was a mole on her nose. If it was normal, Jiang Hai might think about it. But now, before he could think about it, the taxi had already arrived. In order to avoid misunderstanding, Cheryl Lee carried the woman and sat in the back seat of the car, while Jiang Hai, who paid the fare, sat in the front. After saying that it was the Shilla Hotel, Jiang Hai didn't think about it anymore. Instead, he focused on looking at the night view of Seoul. It was now around 11 o'clock in the evening. There weren't many cars in Seoul, so the car drove very fast. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the Shilla Hotel. After paying the fare, Jiang Hai carried the completely drunk Sun Yunju and Cheryl Lee out of the car and walked into the hotel. After taking the elevator to his floor, Jiang Hai went straight into his room. Walking into the room, Jiang Hai found that Azalina was sitting in the living room watching TV at this time. Seeing Jiang Hai carrying a woman back, she was stunned for a moment. Then, she shook her head indifferently. She was just a little surprised. It didn't matter to her how many women Jiang Hai had. Where are they? Looking at Azalina's gaze, Jiang Hai, who originally had some doubts about whether this woman was Sun Yunju, was relieved because he misunderstood the meaning of Azalina's gaze. Azalina was just a little surprised, but he thought that Azalina's gaze was, "How can you still find her?" Now that she saw Jiang Hai carrying her back, she didn't care. God knows what this woman did to her just now. She's in the room. Be gentle. You still have work tomorrow. Looking at Jiang Hai, Azalina said to him. Work? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Work? Well, didn't you say that you wanted the team to contact the South Korea government today? We've already contacted them today. The beef will be flown to Huaxia tonight, and the compensation is only $10 million. The South Korea government agreed very quickly, but they have another request. They will tell you tomorrow. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai nodded a little woodenly. It seemed that he couldn't stay out too late today. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai and Cheryl Lee walked into Jiang Hai's room together with Sun Yunju. Clang clang. However, just as they walked in, Jiang Hai saw three figures suddenly jump out from a distance. Of course, their jump did not scare Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai was looking at the clothes of the three people in front of him unscrupulously. After the three of them came back, they deliberately took a shower first and then changed into very light pajamas. Rather than pajamas, it was more like a pair of, ahem, it was fine as long as everyone understood it. Their attire was visible at a glance, and there was a hint of sexiness to it. It made Jiang Hai's fingers itch instantly. Just as he was about to pounce on them, he realized that something was wrong. Sun Yunju, who he saw just now, was standing in front of him. If Sun Yunju was here, then what about the one in his arms? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at the one in his arms, and the others also looked at this person. This is... They originally thought that with the three of them tonight, Jiang Hai was already a little too much, but they didn't expect Jiang Hai to bring another one back. What the hell is this? Just now, this sister drank too much in the bar and was about to be bullied by some hooligans. I thought it was Yunju. It seems that I misunderstood. Looking at Sun Yunju in front of her, Cheryl Lee smiled a little awkwardly. What should we do now? Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai asked in a daze. This is awkward, call the police. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Yin Soen thought for a moment and said to Jiang Hai first. No, we didn't call the police just now. If we call the police now, we won't be able to explain it clearly. And if it is exposed. But as soon as she mentioned this matter, Li Xiaobin and Sun Yunju next to her immediately rejected it. They are also considered public figures with a reputation. If they call the police and the reporters came and found that the three of them were accompanying a rich businessman late at night, then their future will be ruined. And they don't have the confidence to catch Jiang Hai. As soon as this idea was mentioned, it was rejected. Then what should we do? Looking at the four people in front of him, Jiang Hai was also a little helpless. What is this? What's there to be conflicted about? It's the same as chasing a sheep. I know how powerful you are. Then let her join us. Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Cheryl Lee also took the initiative to come over and said with a smile. Is this something I should take the initiative to do? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. She must have mistaken the priority, she drank so much in the bar. She must be prepared to be picked up. Instead of letting those hooligans take advantage of her, it's better to let you take advantage of her. But we have to check first. I know you don't want to wear a raincoat. Don't get infected with any diseases. That will be troublesome. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl also said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was still somewhat hesitant. Looking at his appearance, Cheryl Lee signaled to the others with her eyes. Then Een Suan and the others swarmed over. It would be impossible for them to rest early tonight. Chapter 832. This body is so dirty. Back to the morning when Jiang Hai and the others went out to play. When Lin Yuner and Jean Taiyan, who had experienced something last night, went downstairs, they happened to meet Lin Yuner's boyfriend, Li Xingji. When he saw his girlfriend coming down from the elevator in the morning with her clothes in a mess and no makeup, he was stunned. When Lin Yuner saw him, she was even more stunned. The most embarrassing thing in the world might be something like this. It was too cruel, too NTR. But unfortunately, it was not Jiang Hai who was being tortured. Even if Jiang Hai knew, he would at most say that it was too embarrassing. He was originally a good person. Fortunately, Jean Taiyan reacted quickly. She immediately pulled Lin Yuner and got into the car they drove yesterday and quickly left. After Lin Yuner left, Li Xingji seemed to have gone crazy and kept calling her. He drove out to look for traces of them, but unfortunately, there was nothing. Lin Yuner could not face this man at this time. She also guessed that he might go to her home to look for her, so she did not go home. Instead, she went to Jean Taiyan's house. When she got home, the first thing she did was to take a shower. But after rubbing many times, she still felt very dirty. Not physically, but spiritually. She wiped the steamy mirror and looked at her body in the mirror that was already red from rubbing. Big drops of tears flowed down her red and swollen doe eyes. Probably because she heard the sound of the bathroom, Jean Taiyan also walked over and leaned against the door. She did not know what to do now. Last night, Yuner was not the only one who had a nightmare. She also had a nightmare. But now, she had to comfort this injured girl. But what should she say? What should she do? She also needed someone to comfort her. What should she do? Han Jaron was born in Seoul, South Korea in 1982. She was considered a top student and graduated from Tsinghua University. In 2002, she entered the entertainment industry through a commercial. Then, she starred in Yellow Handkerchief. Once the TV series was broadcast, it could be said that she became popular. In the idol circle of South Korea, the most popular were not the more famous ones in Hwaseong, such as Song Huiqiao and Kwon Ji-shin. The most popular was naturally the number one beauty of South Korea, Kim Tae-hee, while Han Jaron and Sun Ijin coexisted behind her. It could be said that they were all part of the top group of female celebrities in South Korea. As for Han Jaron, she could be said to be one of the representatives at the peak of her career. In 2005, she married another actor, Yen Jung-shuan. He retired in 2007, probably due to financial reasons. He came back in 10 years, and after that, he became popular again. However, not long after she became popular, she retired again because of her pregnancy. It was the same this time. It had been a long time since she appeared in the public eye because she gave birth to her baby this year. Originally, this was a very enviable family in the entertainment industry, but things were never as perfect as outsiders imagined. The woman was pregnant for more than 9 months. When the man went out to work, he could always come into contact with those young and beautiful girls who wanted to climb up the social ladder. Naturally, her husband slowly went astray. She just found out about this today. After a big fight with her husband, who had just returned from a business meeting, she went to the bar to drink alone. However, she didn't expect that she would drink too much. She couldn't remember what happened next. She only vaguely remembered that she was taken away by a woman. Then, she vaguely remembered that she seemed to have entered a room where several women took off her clothes. Afterwards, she had a dream. It was a dream about something, a dream that couldn't be described. It wasn't until she woke up the next day and found herself lying naked in a room that she finally realized what had happened to her the night before. Ah! She held on to her hair and screamed loudly. She couldn't believe that she had spent the night outside like this. And, a few hours ago, she was still yelling at her husband for being unfaithful. But now, what right did she have to scold him? The relationship between men and women was unequal to begin with. This was even more so in South Korea. If a man got into an accident, a woman was likely to forgive him. But if a woman got into an accident, not only would the man not forgive her, but the whole world would criticize her. Thinking of this, Koreana couldn't help but feel a lump in her throat. Tears began to fall from her eyes. Ah! What happened? At this time, the door of the room opened, and Jiang Hai walked in with a puzzled look on his face. But when he saw Han Jiaren sitting there crying, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, then he smiled a little awkwardly. "Oh, you're awake." Looking at this woman, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say. He could only respond with a smile. You beast, you're worse than a pig or a dog." Looking at Jiang Hai, Koreana seemed to have found a breakthrough. She began to yell at him loudly. But unfortunately, it was like casting pearls before swine. Jiang Hai didn't understand at all. "I'm sorry, I don't speak Korean, so I don't understand what you're saying. I still have things to do now. If you think of a solution, you can wait for me. You can use this room as you wish." Until she was tired of scolding, Jiang Hai scratched his head and said something that almost made her faint. Then he smiled apologetically and left. Looking at Jiang Hai's back as he left, Koreana threw the pillow next to her with all her strength. It hit the door heavily, and then she began to scream. But after screaming for a long time, she gradually calmed down. Since things had already happened, it was meaningless to think about it now. Now, she had to think about how to solve this matter. From this, it can be seen that Han Jia's ability to take a blow was much stronger than Lin Yun-er. Lin Yun-er was trying to save her career and her family. In the end, she ended up having sex with Jiang Hai. It could be said that one was willing to fight while the other was willing to obstruct. In the end, they both collapsed. But this woman quickly calmed down and began to think of a way. Her mind turned. The first thing she thought of was that this matter couldn't be publicized. She couldn't let others know. She couldn't call the police. Judging from what Jiang Hai said just now, although he had an Asian face, he should be a foreigner. If this matter was exposed, then she would be ruined. And this guy just patted his butt and went abroad. She still couldn't do anything. Secondly, she had to hide this matter from her husband. She was now in no mood to pursue her husband's affairs outside. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel sad. She was really a coward. She was raped, but the result was that she couldn't publicize it. She even had to reconcile with the person who raped her and ask him to help her hide this matter. Shame, although she felt humiliated from the inside out, she still stood up and put on her clothes. She wanted to find the man just now and explain things to him. However, when she opened the door, she only found two women in the living room. These two women, one a foreigner and one an Asian, were sitting there watching TV. When they heard the door open, the two of them also looked over. After seeing that it was Koreana, they smiled kindly. This. Looking at the situation outside, Koreana couldn't help but feel a little confused. She didn't know what to say. "Hello, what's the matter? Are you not feeling well?" Looking at her, Cheryl Lee stood up and asked with some doubts. The police station was open until very late last night, but early this morning, Yin Suan, Li Xiubin, and Sun Yunju all left. After she got up, she also watched TV here. Last night, it was said that Jiang Hai would have a meeting with the senior management of South Korea today. So just now, Azalina and Galina left with Jiang Hai, leaving only Wallace Shelley here. The two of them were watching TV together. At this time, Koreana appeared, which also startled them. "No, nothing, There's something, where is that man? Although it was a bit difficult to say this, Coriana gritted her teeth. For her family, for her career, for her everything, she must reach an agreement with that man. Man? Oh, Jiang Hai. He went to a meeting. Are you looking for him for something? Looking at Coriana in front of her, Cheryl Lee asked with some doubts. Looking at her gnashing her teeth, it was better to pretend that she didn't know anything now. If this woman knew that he was the one who asked Jiang Hai to bring her back yesterday, she would probably find trouble with him. Yes, if it's convenient, can you give me his phone number? Taking a deep breath, Coriana forcibly suppressed the anger in her heart and asked Cheryl Lee in front of her. Hearing her words, Cheryl Lee shrugged and gave her Jiang Hai's phone number. After getting Jiang Hai's phone number, she nodded gently. After thinking for a while, she went into the bathroom first. After tidying up and making sure that there was no problem, she went downstairs. Of course, she still had to be careful when going downstairs. After all, there were a lot of paparazzi here. She quietly went downstairs and got into a taxi. Then, she called the number that Cheryl Lee had given her. Chapter 833. Sitting in an extended Rolls-Royce, a person sent by Zhang Jin sat in front of Jiang Hai and said with a serious face, "Boss, this time, the South Korea side wants to see you. Their intention is very clear. They want to get the formula for the mutation of the forage from your hands, or they want to cooperate with you." This person was the person in charge of the negotiation team. Gao Peng had to admit that Zhang Jin was a talent. She had a good eye for people. The person in charge of the negotiation team in front of him was called Toulouse Parkville. He was a European of Greek descent. However, he had lived in the United States since he was young. He was already 35 years old this year. 10 years ago, he graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In the beginning, he was high-spirited. He went to New York to make a living as a trader, a salesman, and a worker. He had his glory and his downfall. After Jiang Hai established the Tinglong Company last year, Zhang Jin felt that he was a good person after some introductions. Thus, she accepted him into the company. It turned out that Toulouse Parkville was not suitable for starting his own business. However, it was not bad for him to work for someone else. He started as a salesman and became a sales supervisor within 3 months. Half a year later, he was promoted to the position of deputy manager of the sales department. Moreover, his ability had already surpassed that of a manager. His negotiation skills and ability to read people's minds were quite good. Most importantly, his 10 years of experience in society had smoothed out his edges and corners. He was now very willing to stay in the Tinglong Company. Of course, the salary that Jiang Hai gave him was also the basis for his agreement. Jiang Hai's company was not listed, so his shares were 100%. However, he gave out a 10% dividend to those who performed well. In addition to her annual salary of $1 million, Zhang Jin also received a 5% dividend. Although this was the first year, there was not much profit. After all, the Tinglong Company transported most of Jiang Hai's beef. However, the annual net profit was more than $50 million. She received a 5% dividend, which was $2.5 million. Together with her salary, it was $3.5 million. Such an annual salary was very scary for a new company. After all, the annual salary that the Walmart Group gave Pra Walton was only $3 million. Of course, this was also because she was only in charge of one department. Toulouse Parkville's annual salary was $300,000. However, Zhang Jin gave him a 1% dividend, which meant that he could earn $800,000 this year. This was for a person who was unemployed a year ago. This was an astronomical figure. He knew very well that he was now tied to Jiang Hai's chariot. As long as he does his job well, his income will increase in the future. Otherwise, Zhang Jin wouldn't have sent him as the head of the negotiation team. And this time, he didn't come here in vain. Jiang Hai had already made an agreement with him before he came. They could get 10% of the negotiated amount, which was the compensation amount. Therefore, they were all holding back at the beginning. They wanted the $100 million compensation. That 10% was $10 million. Divided among the 6 of them, and even if Moses Adams' share was included, each of them would get more than $1 million. However, Jiang Hai was in the lead and fell in love with his woman. Therefore, the $100 million became $10 million. However, $10 million was not bad. Each of them would get more than $1 million. As for why the South Koreans invited Jiang Hai to Kingwadi, he could more or less guess it. I feel the same way. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai chuckled. As soon as the South Koreans raised their butts, Jiang Hai knew that they were going to shit a few sheep dung eggs. These people were famous for their shamelessness. Boss, these are the plans we made for you. You can take a look. Hearing that Jiang Hai was mentally prepared, Tuluman smiled and took out a stack of papers from his briefcase. He handed it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai took it and looked at it briefly. To be honest, Jiang Hai hated looking at things. However, now that it was related to business, he had to look at it even if he did not want to. After glancing at the things on the paper, Jiang Hai really thought highly of Tuluman. On this stack of papers, almost all the things that the South Koreans might ask Jiang Hai about were listed. If Jiang Hai was interested, he could take note of it. According to the things written on it, it was enough to deal with the South Koreans without leaving any loopholes. However, Jiang Hai smiled and returned the stack of papers to Tuluman in front of him. Boss? Seeing Jiang Hai's action, Tuluman was a little confused. Was Jiang Hai not satisfied with these things? No, I'm quite satisfied with these things, but you've got one thing wrong. That's the problem between me and the South Koreans. Our pasture is unique in the world, and it's absolutely impossible for others to copy it. Therefore, the things you wrote about dealing with a country are more about me at the bottom, while the South Koreans are at the top. Looking at Tuluman in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled. To be honest, if he was just an ordinary person, then this document would be excellent. If his pasture could be deciphered, then this document would also be good. Because this document perfectly demonstrated the word subterfuge. It's not that I don't want to give it to you, it's not that I don't want to announce it, but it's not the time yet. This word subterfuge is a very correct approach for other people. After all, Jiang Hai is a person, and the South Koreans are a country. But it doesn't exist for Jiang Hai because his main business projects are in the United States. Hwaseong is also connected. The South Koreans can't threaten him at all. He's probably going to leave this time, and it's unlikely that he'll come back in the future. The secret of the pasture will never be deciphered by anyone. He's more confident about this than anyone else. After all, there's only one Dragon Ball in the world, and it's now in his body. What's there to study? Therefore, the person who led this conversation between him and the South Koreans was Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai is standing in a high position, and he's looking at a country with a gaze of charity. Yes, the current Jiang Hai has such strength and ability. According to the Prawalton calculation, if Jiang Hai's manor were to be listed now, the cattle, the fishery, and the pasture, Jiang Hai's current wealth would be worth at least tens of billions. It wouldn't be a problem for him to become the richest man in the world. Of course, Jiang Hai is only rich. When it comes to influence, he's far behind. Yes, I understand. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Tuluman also nodded. Although he doesn't know where Jiang Hai's confidence comes from, believing that his pasture is absolutely impossible to decipher, Jiang Hai's confidence can save him a lot of trouble. Of course, he will still do what needs to be done. 10 years of working life made him understand. Sometimes, for some work, it's not a matter of whether you do it or not, but whether you do it or not. For example, this stack of reports. Even if he knew Jiang Hai's confidence, he would still do it. This is some of the rules of the workplace. Just like now, although Jiang Hai didn't use his report, he still praised him, didn't he? We've arrived at the Blue House. At this moment, Galina, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, suddenly said to the back of the car. After hearing her words, Jiang Hai also looked at the existence of the highest honor in South Korea. Let's go. Under the bright sun, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said softly. Tuluman, who was sitting opposite him, got out of the car first and opened the door for Jiang Hai. Then, Azalina and Galina rushed over and stood next to Jiang Hai. At this time, the two had changed into casual women's suits. Their hair was tied up and they wore sunglasses. They really looked stern. In addition to the two of them, one of the two male bodyguards also came to act as a driver. After standing in place, Jiang Hai's group of 5 also walked into the Blue House. The guard had already reported the news of Jiang Hai's arrival, so when Jiang Hai walked to the door, there were already people there to greet him. Of course, with Jiang Hai's current status, the president of South Korea would not come to greet him. The people who came to greet him were the people in charge of this matter. Jiang Hai also knew 2 of them. One was the arrogant South Korean woman that Jiang Hai saw when he was selling grass. The other was the man called Li Shihui. When he saw Jiang Hai again after Jiang Hai came here, he was filled with emotions. If he had not been shameless enough to let the 2 women curry favor with Jiang Hai, he might have been a fool now. How could he be like this now? This time, he also received a mission. Because he confiscated Jiang Hai's plane, the sales time was shortened and the quality of the meat was slightly damaged. Therefore, Jiang Hai's legal team asked the South Korean government to compensate them with $10 million, but they could choose not to apologize. For a country, between $10 million and an apology, they naturally chose the former. How important was a country's face? As long as it could be settled with money, it was not a problem. However, the higher-ups also gave them some pressure. If the negotiations with Jiang Hai today achieved the expected result, then the $10 million would be taken by the South Korean government. If not, then Li Shihui would take it himself. Although Li Shihui also felt a little reluctant to take out 12 billion won, it was still within his acceptable range. However, if he could save it, it was naturally better to save it. Moreover, he thought that he had grasped Jiang Hai's weakness, which was why he was so happy today. However, if he thought that Jiang Hai was a person who was so easy to deal with, then he was wrong. Although Jiang Hai could not control his strength sometimes, if he knew that this was a trap, he would not jump into it. Chapter 834. Mr. Jiang Hai, I have been waiting for you for a long time. As soon as he saw Jiang Hai, Li Shihui greeted him with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled, stepped forward and shook hands with him, then looked at the representative over there. I didn't expect that we would meet again so soon. Looking at Jiang Hai, the arrogant representative also said softly. Yeah, but didn't you say that you have nothing to do with this matter? Now it doesn't look like you have nothing to do with it. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, the person here couldn't help but chuckle. Those people seem to think that this technology of yours is extremely important, and you are very hostile, so they sent me, someone who has been in contact with you, to explore your background. Looking at Jiang Hai, this person didn't care what Jiang Hai thought and said directly. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled, and he couldn't deny such an attitude. Please. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't care about what he said, the person also nodded with a smile, then made a gesture of invitation. He motioned to Jiang Hai to go in, but just as Jiang Hai was about to walk in, his personal phone rang. Picking it up and looking at it, he found that it was an unfamiliar phone. Jiang Hai thought for a moment, then gestured to everyone, asking them to wait a moment, and then went to the side to pick it up. Hello? Hello, who is this? After connecting the phone, Jiang Hai asked the person on the other side. Hello, my name is. Cough, I don't know if you still remember what happened last night. I am the woman this morning. After hearing Jiang Hai's voice, the woman on the other side subconsciously wanted to say her name, but she quickly covered it up, and then said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also remembered the scene this morning. Oh, of course I remember. What's the matter? Looking at this woman, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. I think we should meet. I have something to say to you. After thinking for a while, the woman said to Jiang Hai over the phone. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai touched his nose. All right. I'm at the Blue House now. If you need me, you can come over first. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai decided to tell her his location. After all, something happened last night. Jiang Hai also wanted to know why she was looking for him. I want to talk to you in private. I won't take up too much of your time. As soon as she heard the 3 words Blue House, the woman on the other side was obviously stunned for a moment. Then she gently bit her lips and said to Jiang Hai. Oh, I don't know about this. Let's wait until you come over. I don't know when it will end here. Glancing at Li Shihuai and the man beside him, Jiang Hai thought for a while and said to her. Then, okay, when I arrive, I will call you. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, the woman also said a sentence and then hung up the phone. In fact, when she heard that Jiang Hai was at the Blue House, to be honest, she was a little panicked. Blue House, the highest place in South Korea. For the people of South Korea, Blue House was the same as a certain sea in Hwaseong. The people who could go there were undoubtedly people that she, as a star, couldn't afford to provoke. But for her career and her family, she must go and explain it to Jiang Hai. She took a deep breath, gave herself a pep talk, and directly called the taxi driver to drive to Blue House. At this time, after Jiang Hai saw her hang up the phone, he shrugged and followed the person who greeted him into the Blue House. Of course, after they entered, they couldn't walk around casually. After all, the president and the others were still working here. So they just entered a small conference room and sat down. The people here also exchanged a few pleasantries before getting to the main topic. After Li Shihuai spoke, Jiang Hai and Tuluman couldn't help but look at each other with a trace of disdain on their lips. Sure enough, the first thing South Korea wanted to do when they called Jiang Hai over was to buy out Jiang Hai's secret recipe for the growth of forage grass. For this, they were willing to pay $50 billion, which was 60 trillion won. South Korea's national GDP was $1,378 billion a year. They could give half of the country's total monthly income to Jiang Hai, which was already a large sum of money. But to be honest, 50 billion was not enough for Jiang Hai. You don't have to say that. I don't know why my forage grass is so good, let alone buying it out. If you mention this again, then I think our cooperation will end. Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai gently threw the pen in his hand on the table, then leaned back in his chair and spoke with a trace of disdain on his face. If Mr. Jiang doesn't want to share the secret of forage grass, then can you transfer your manor in Winthrop? We are also very interested in it. For this, we are willing to pay $20 billion. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Shihuai hesitated for a moment before speaking to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him like he was an idiot. Indeed, his manor itself was not very valuable, but the grass in the manor was very valuable. Moreover, the most important thing was that no one dared to touch him now because he could still create benefits for several parties. If his manor was gone, although he could build another one, Jiang Hai estimated that no one would give him a few more years to grow. Although $20 billion was good, if Jiang Hai wanted it, he would be like a child walking on the road with gold bricks in his arms. He had to have the ability to protect this sum of money, but now it seemed that he obviously did not have such ability. Let's go. It seems that the sincerity of the South Korea side is really not that good. I really regret letting you come into contact with them. After saying that, Jiang Hai directly stood up and prepared to leave. Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to leave, the South Korea people also stood up, but their expressions were a little contradictory. Some of them had a flattering smile on their faces, while others had a touch of coldness. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile in disdain. Would these guys dare to make a move on him in the Blue House? He just laughed it off. Mr. Jiang, don't we have to talk about everything? Don't you think so? Li Shihuai also walked out at this time and stopped Jiang Hai with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked around and then slowly walked back. However, he did not take his bag and sit down. Instead, he stood there and touched the seat with his hand, slowly tapping it. If I hear one more time that you want me to sell secrets or manners, then I'll leave. From now on, the supply of pasture to the South Korea will also be suspended. You guys should be careful. Only Jiang Hai dared to speak so arrogantly to a country. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the South Korea people felt a little uncomfortable in their hearts. It was understandable. The people of South Korea were known for their strong self-esteem. In their eyes, the whole world had to acknowledge them. What they said was right. However, now that Jiang Hai actually slapped them in the face in front of them, they could not take it anymore. But fortunately, they knew that Jiang Hai was not a person to be trifled with, so they forcibly suppressed the anger in their hearts and returned to the table with a smile. Since the secret and the manor were not for sale, then it seemed that the only thing they could buy was the pasture and cooperation. According to them, they were going to raise a batch of their so-called national treasures after Jiang Hai provided them with pasture. Listening to them bragging about how awesome their Korean cows were, Jiang Hai could not help but chuckle, but he did not say anything. He just quietly watched these people bragging. Did they really think that he was Xiao Bai, who had never raised cows before? What a joke. Jiang Hai had been raising cows for 3 years. Not to mention other more detailed work, at least he could tell the quality of the cattle. At present, the best cattle in the world was naturally the Japanese cattle. Although he hated Japan, he had to admit this. Next would be the Charolais cattle, followed by the Limousin cattle. If the milk production was taken into account, then it would be the Simmental cattle. After that, it would be the German cattle, followed by the Angus cattle, and then the Mola buffalo. Purely based on the breed of cattle, the domestic Lucy yellow cattle were ranked higher than the South Korean cattle. However, the South Korea people were infatuated with their Han cattle. They boasted every day that Han cattle was a breed that could compete with Chinese cattle. In South Korea's Gangwon province, there was also a breeding ground for Han cattle. Jiang Hai did not like this kind of cattle. After all, it was just a cross between an ordinary European cattle and a South Korean cattle. However, since these people were willing to worship it, Jiang Hai could not say anything. After all, there were people in China who worshipped dogs. In this regard, Jiang Hai could only chuckle. After listening to them brag about 13 moves, they also explained their own intentions. They were going to build a new Han cattle breeding base in Jizhou Island. They were going to raise 1 million cows. Naturally, Jiang Hai was going to provide the feed for them. Unfortunately, Jiang Hai directly rejected them with a single sentence, so there was no more. My manor is only so big, and the amount of grass produced is only so much. If you can get the grass from Do Feynman, Luke Shawn, or John Malone, then I will sell it to you. After listening to them talk for a long time, Jiang Hai did not talk nonsense and directly refuted them. When they heard what Jiang Hai said, the South Korea people were a little confused. Li Shihuai and the others looked at Jiang Hai. They couldn't figure out what was going on. This was because this guy didn't play according to the rules. Chapter 835. Do you have something important to tell Jiang Hai? Sitting in the cafe, Azalina watched this woman in front of her with a dubious look. After hearing Azalina's words, this woman stirred the coffee in front of her as she became hesitant. Because it was really a bit embarrassing for her to talk about it, Azalina also knew the woman opposite her. After all, Jiang Hai just took her back last night. At first, she thought she was Sun Yinju's sister or something, but now it seemed that she didn't know her. To be honest, Azalina didn't quite understand why she was looking for Jiang Hai. At first, she thought that she might be looking for Jiang Hai for some money, or to threaten Jiang Hai, but the current situation didn't seem to be the case. The things that this woman was wearing should be of great value. Although she should be in her 30s, she had maintained herself very well and was still very beautiful. She had the aura of a rich lady. This kind of woman should not have too many problems in terms of finances. Therefore, if Jiang Hai wasn't here for money, then what was it for? She wasn't too sure in her heart. Sigh, let's wait until he comes. After hesitating for a while, the woman opposite her thought about it and said to Azalina. The woman opposite her was naturally none other than Han Jia. After she took a taxi to the vicinity of Chongwadi, she got out of the car and walked over after disguising herself. Although she wasn't very famous in Huaxia and other places, she had always been a goddess in Huaxia. But in South Korea, she has always been a top goddess, so even if she has been out of the movie for a while, she still has to be careful. After arriving here, she called Jiang Hai. Not long after the call was connected, this woman named Azalina appeared in front of her, then took her to this coffee shop and told her that Jiang Hai was still in a meeting with the South Korean government, so he didn't have time to talk to her for the time being. He would come over after a while. Hearing Azalina's words, Han Jia also nodded. When she came, she knew that Jiang Hai was a guest of honor at Chongwadi. It seemed that she would definitely be at a disadvantage. Now her only thought was to reach an agreement with Jiang Hai. As long as Jiang Hai helped her keep last night's matter a secret, everything would be easy. Thinking of this, her hand holding the coffee cup unconsciously tightened. Sorry, those guys are really annoying, I'm late. Just as she was struggling here, Jiang Hai also walked in from outside the coffee shop. After walking in front of Han Jia, he smiled and said something in English. Oh. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Han Jia's reaction was not very enthusiastic. It was understandable. She and Jiang Hai actually had a grudge against each other, but this kind of grudge had to be temporarily suppressed. There was no such thing as enthusiasm. I heard that you were looking for me. Sitting next to Azalina, Jiang Hai looked at Han Jia in front of him and said, Are you done with your business? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Han Jia's words were a little difficult for a while, so she could only exchange a few words. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai sighed, then shook his head. Although you're from Southern Gaoli, I still have to say that your government is really a bunch of bastards. You don't know what kind of conditions they gave me in order to get me to help you build a cattle farm. With a chuckle, Jiang Hai looked at Han Jia's in front of him and said somewhat speechlessly. Back to 10 minutes ago, in the conference room of Chongwadi where Jiang Hai was, those senior officials of South Korea first asked to buy out Jiang Hai's pasture. After that failed, they wanted to buy a manor. Naturally, this also didn't work. In the case that the first two conditions didn't work, they wanted to buy more pasture. The original 900,000 tons was naturally not enough. Therefore, when they asked to increase it to 3 million tons, Jiang Hai naturally refused. Although it was 3 million or 1 million, Jiang Hai had to consider where he would get the 100,000 tons from. Although he still had some in stock, why would he sell it to South Korea? The people of South Korea mainly had these three thoughts. If the first one didn't work, the second one didn't work, and the third one didn't work, then this meeting with Jiang Hai would be meaningless, especially since Li Shihuai had been discussing with Jiang Hai how much they could increase it. But Jiang Hai was adamant that they couldn't increase it at all, unless they could take it from him. But they weren't stupid. They knew that this was simply impossible. They couldn't afford to provoke Du Feynman. He was the royal family of Dubai. The Arabs in the Middle East all wore the same pants. If they dared to go against those people, these people could join forces to mess with the United States. If the United States was messed with, they would definitely vent their anger on South Korea. After all, South Korea didn't produce oil. Luke Shawn was an international tycoon and one of the largest ranchers in the central part of the United States. They didn't dare to be arrogant. John Malone was even more so. These few big heads couldn't move, and the same was true for those small heads. That was why they were a little conflicted. Seeing that Jiang Hai was still unmoved, Li Shihuai also knew that there wouldn't be any effect if he continued to talk like this. So, he thought of Jiang Hai's weakness and the habits of Huaxia people. Huaxia people were used to talking about business at the table, so he smiled and temporarily gave up on asking Jiang Hai to make a statement this morning. Instead, he made a dinner appointment in the evening to talk about it then. At this time, Jiang Hai was also a little interested in them. He wanted to see what these guys wanted to do. After making an appointment, Jiang Hai came to the coffee shop as Azalina said. "Oh, since you're so busy, then I will make a long story short. I hope that no one else will know about what happened last night." Looking at Jiang Hai, Han Jiaran hesitated for a moment and said to Jiang Hai in a tough tone. "Oh. Why do you say that?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai leaned back and looked at her with some doubts. I have my own career, my own family, and I have a lovely daughter, so I don't want these to be destroyed. What happened last night was a heavy blow to my family, so I hope we can skip this part." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Han Jiaran bit her lip and said to Jiang Hai. "Oh." Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai shook his head. In fact, in essence, Jiang Hai is not a bad person. Of course, he is definitely not a good person. He is just an ordinary person. If Han Jiaran didn't come to him today and just left, maybe Jiang Hai would have forgotten about it, but this woman came to him specifically, which made Jiang Hai's soul of seeking death begin to stir. Touching his chin, he didn't agree as Han Jiaran imagined. I can give you money, please forget what happened last night." Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Han Jiaran hesitated for a moment, bit her lip, and said with a serious face. To be honest, although her family's finances are good, they are not particularly rich. They don't have to worry about food and clothing, but it is not to the point where they can squander money at will. "Money, I don't need it. If you need it, I can give you some. I don't exaggerate, my annual income is billions of dollars. Otherwise, I wouldn't be a guest of honor at the Blue House, right?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shook his head. It is not his style to ask a woman for money, so he directly said to her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Han Jiaran couldn't help but sigh. She knew that foreigners who can come here are definitely not people that can be bought with money, but besides money, she really didn't know what else she could give him. "Then, what exactly do you want?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Han Jiaran was a little discouraged because she really didn't know what to do. Looking at Jiang Hai pitifully, she was really a little confused now. "Let me think about it. If I think about it, I will call you." "Is the number you are calling your number?" Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai also wanted to tease her, so he shook his phone at her and said to her. "Well, this is my number. If you have any requests, you can call me at any time, please." Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Han Jiaran also stood up and bowed respectfully. Jiang Hai looked at her appearance and chuckled. He has to admit that sometimes teasing these women is quite interesting, just as Jiang Hai was teasing Han Jiaran here. On the other side of Kim Tae's house, Kim Taeyen and Lin Yuner were at home. Because of what happened the night before, they put off their work for the next 2 days and wanted to have a good rest at home. After a day of rest yesterday, although they were still in a bad mood today, they were much calmer. At this time, the two were watching TV at home. Although Li Shihuai is a despicable person, he is a man of his words. Jiang Hai's team contacted the South Korea side. He then sent a text message to the company that he couldn't identify. Then the company's representative personally sent a message to the two, telling them that they could rest, but they could resume work whenever they wanted, and all the company's resources were at their disposal. This was Li Shihuai's ability in South Korea, but this kind of compensation didn't make the two girls feel warm in their hearts. After seeing the text message, they didn't even reply. They continued to stay in their small space, there in a daze. But some things couldn't be solved by running away. For example, now, their phones rang again. Chapter 836. What's the matter? Lin Yun, who was watching TV and eating, asked Jean Tien next to her. Lin Yun, was a girl who liked to eat very much, and she had a good appetite. She liked to eat, especially when she was sad these 2 days. She had to eat a lot every day. She didn't know if she would get fat. Maybe it was to avoid Li Xingji, but she really didn't have the face to see him now. So when Lin Yun, arrived at Jean Tian's house, she had already turned off her phone. Now only Jean Tian's phone was ringing. In order not to let Li Xingji find her, Jean Tien had also muted her phone these days. If it wasn't someone close to them, they really couldn't find them. But now, she had to look at this text message. Hearing Lin Yun's words, Jean Tien also hesitated, and then threw the phone aside. Nothing, just a text message from the company. Hearing what Jean Tien said, Lin Yun was stunned for a moment. Then, she glanced at Jean Tien, and then instantly snatched the phone. She opened the phone and found that it was indeed a text message from the company. It was just that what was said in the text message was not as simple as Jean Tien thought. Because it was an invitation to a cocktail party. Compared to the order a few days ago, today's words were much softer. But when she saw the words above, Lin Yun's body still trembled unconsciously. Because it was written very clearly that the guest she was accompanying was Jiang Hai. They had already experienced what it meant to accompany Jiang Hai, hadn't they? We can ignore them. After all, we have sacrificed the day before yesterday. Don't be afraid. Everything will pass. Looking at Lin Yun's appearance, Jean Tien also sighed, then hugged Lin Yun next to her and said anxiously. She was really afraid that something would happen to her sister. At the same time, she hated her company and that Li Shihuai. Were these guys going to continue to humiliate her like this? After the first time, they still wanted the second time? Would there be a third time, a fourth time, and a fifth time in the future? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but grit her teeth. She wouldn't do this. Even if she had to fight to the death, she wouldn't let these people have it easy. No, I want to go. However, at this moment, Lin Yun suddenly raised her head. Tears had already covered her face, but her voice was still very firm. She looked at Jean Tien and said with a serious face. But. Hearing that she was going, Jean Tien was at a loss. What was she going to do in such a situation? I want to see what these guys can do. Hearing what Jean Tien wanted to say, Lin Yun interrupted her and then said with a serious face. Seeing the anger in her eyes and the feeling of anger, Jean Tien sighed helplessly. Indeed, she didn't know what to do now. If Lin Yun wanted to go, then she had to accompany her. She also wanted to see what Jiang Hai and the others were going to do. If they dared to go overboard, she would take them down with her. The sky gradually darkened. Unknowingly, it was already the time mentioned in the message. After the two of them gave a simple score, they went downstairs with cold faces. They got into the car that the company had specially driven to pick them up and went to the Shilla Hotel. Looking at the night view of Seoul, the depths of the two women's hearts were as dark as the night view. At this time, no one knew what the two women were thinking. On the other side, a woman who had a relationship with Jiang Hai was walking back to her home with a tired face. There was no anger in her eyes, only endless confusion. After all, Han Jia was considered a goddess-like figure in South Korea. Naturally, she had earned a lot over the years. In Seoul, housing prices were actually quite expensive. Compared to the imperial capital, it wasn't much worse. In South Korea, most of the stars rented houses in Seoul. Here, there was a division of long rent and short rent. That was another story. It had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Most of the people who owned property bought houses in the remote areas of Seoul. However, Han Jia was still an actress who was considered a national treasure in South Korea, so she didn't lack money. In Seoul, they had their own standalone villa. Although it wasn't big, only about 150 square meters, the two-story villa was very exquisite. Like a walking corpse, she returned home. After opening the door, she looked at the empty house and leaned weakly against the door. Then she slowly squatted down and rubbed her face hard before she stood up. She looked around the house but didn't find any trace of her husband. Because of the argument the day before, her daughter had been sent to her mother to help take care of her. The entire villa was unusually quiet at this time. After meeting with Jiang Hai in the morning, she walked around the streets of Seoul alone. She didn't know how to face her husband and her child. She was really afraid that after she returned, she would be suspected by her husband because she didn't know what to say. So, for a while, other than wandering outside, she didn't have anywhere else to go. Powerless, she was like a rootless duckweed, swaying back and forth on the streets of Seoul. But no matter how much she swayed, there was a time when she had to return home. Finally, she returned home at night. But when she returned home, she was still alone. Phew, it's over, isn't it? It's just a nightmare, a nightmare. But why is it that when I wake up from a nightmare, reality is another nightmare? Han Jia smiled bitterly and muttered to herself. Then she stood up and went to tidy up the house. Halfway through, she heard the door open. Han Jia's husband walked in from outside in a daze. After glancing at Han Jia, he didn't want to talk too much with his beautiful wife. After glancing at her indifferently, he turned around and walked into the room. He didn't take a shower or take off his clothes. He just lay down on the bed and fell asleep. Han Jia looked at her husband and smelled the smell of alcohol and perfume on his body. Needless to say, his drinking just now was obviously not that clean. Normally, Han Jia's wife would inevitably argue with him, but now she felt that she wasn't clean. What was there to argue about? After a self-deprecating smile, Han Jia's wife sat in the kitchen on the first floor. Her eyes began to wander. At this time, in a living room of the Shilla Hotel, Li Shihuai and the others were eating with Jiang Hai. Because Li Shihuai knew that Jiang Hai didn't like to eat Korean food, he decided to eat Western food this time. As for the Chinese food that was very famous in South Korea, Li Shihuai didn't choose it. It was because the Chinese food in South Korea had changed beyond recognition. When it came to food, as a Huaxia person, Chinese food was naturally the first choice. It could be said that as long as there were people in the world, there would be Chinese restaurants. This sentence wasn't groundless. Chinese food had many characteristics. It was simple, easy, tasted good, made a lot of money, and was very inclusive, but it was also because of this that the Chinese food they ate abroad didn't feel like Chinese food at all. Jiang Hai lived in the United States. There were many Chinese restaurants in the United States, but in order to cater to the tastes of Americans, these Chinese food had been changed. Basically, they were all sour and sweet, but they weren't the sour and sweet taste of Chinese food. Jiang Hai liked to eat double-fried pork. Double-fried pork was sour and sweet. In the province, double-fried pork was made with ketchup. But the real double-fried pork was made with sugar and vinegar. Jiang Hai wasn't used to it. In the United States, almost all Chinese food was made with ketchup because Americans liked it. In South Korea, although it was quite close to Huaxia, the Chinese food here was also modified. Almost all the Chinese food here was too sweet. To be honest, Jiang Hai didn't like to eat it. For example, the famous jjiajiang noodles, seafood noodles, and so on. Jiang Hai didn't like those taste very much. In Jiang Hai's view, this is also the difference between Chinese food and French food. French food and Chinese food are known all over the world. But no matter which French restaurant it was, it represented high-end. Huaxia's restaurant was very popular. Of course, it wasn't to say that Chinese food wasn't as high-end as French food. Jiang Hai was a Huaxia person. He naturally knew how terrifying Huaxia's dishes were. But the problem was that those high-end dishes couldn't be spread outside. Firstly, it was because foreigners might not like the taste of those dishes. Secondly, it was because some dishes were secret and wouldn't be spread outside. Because of this, Jiang Hai would rather eat Western food than Chinese food when he was overseas. It was because the Chinese food here couldn't be considered Chinese food to cater to the local customers. What appetizers, what soup, and so on, Jiang Hai had eaten them before. Naturally, he also introduced them in detail, so he didn't say much here. The food was also served separately, but it wasn't like the last time, where there was only one person at a table. Instead, it was an oversized long table, and Jiang Hai and the others sat on both sides of it. It could be seen that the people on both sides weren't very nice. Opposite Jiang Hai was Li Shihuai, the representative he met today, 3 people he met at Qingwadai, and 3 women. A total of 8 people. On Jiang Hai's side, there was only Jiang Hai and Cheryl Li. After Azalina came back, she went to rest. She wasn't interested in these things. On the other hand, Cheryl Li liked to join in the fun. Therefore, she came along with Jiang Hai. Looking at the high officials in front of her, she was very proud. But at this time, the door of the Western restaurant was pushed open. 2 women she had seen before walked in reluctantly. Chapter 837. Oh. Our teenage years are here. Come, sit down, the dishes haven't been served yet. Seeing the 2 of them walk in, Li Shihuai couldn't help but smile and say. Speaking of which, he was really grateful to these 2 girls. If it weren't for them, then he would have suffered a terrible loss, and his family would have to pay for it. It was just that they sacrificed a little, and he had to pay $10 million instead of $100 million. This was 10 times the difference, $10 million. Although this was not a small sum of money, he could still afford it. Department Head Li, we have already done what we should do, what else do you want us to do? But after hearing his words, Lin Yun did not sit down as he said, but still stood at the door and looked at Li Shihuai angrily. Hearing her words that were 70% sarcastic and 30% angry, the atmosphere in the whole room instantly stagnated. What do you mean by this? Hearing her words, Li Shihuai's face also became ugly, and he looked at the 2 people in front of him with an unhappy face. At the same time, he tore off the cloth that had been wrapped around his collar and said with a cold face. What do you mean? It's the meaning behind your words. What do you think we are? Do you think we are people who can come and go as you wish? When did we become your playthings? Yuni, don't stop me, I want to make it clear today. Yes, you won't let us have a good time. Do you think we will let you have a good time? At most, we'll fight to the death and go our separate ways. Hearing Li Shihuai's words, Lin Yun couldn't help but curse, probably because of what happened that day. Hearing her words, Li Shihuai's face became darker and darker. If word got out that he threatened popular female celebrities to drink and sleep with them, then this political scandal was enough for the higher-ups of South Korea to drag him down. To be able to sit in this position, it could be said that he must have made a lot of enemies. If he went down, he could indeed destroy these 2 families, but he would really be finished. In the eyes of these people, his life was much more precious than these female celebrities. What equality! This sentence was just for show. If a poor person committed a murder, even if it was a manslaughter, they would have to stay in prison for more than 10 years. However, if it was a rich person, even if it was a murder, they wouldn't even have to go to prison. Since ancient times, all crows in the world were equally black. This was also an unchanging truth. Just like what the Westerners said, everyone had the 7 deadly sins in their bones. This was also the nature of human beings. Lust, unless they had some special hobby or were congenitally deficient, who wouldn't like this kind of thing? Just like Jiang Hai, he admitted that he had a strong desire in that aspect. Gluttony, in Dante's Divine Comedy, was also called coveting pleasure. Who wouldn't covet such things? He could clearly live happily, so why would he have to tire himself out like a grandson? Jiang Hai was such a person. Greed. Needless to say, how many people in this world didn't love money? Laziness. There was nothing much to say about this. On Monday morning, who would be willing to get up, whether it was to go to class or go to school? If it weren't for the need to earn money to eat, it was estimated that many people would choose to lie at home, sleep until they woke up naturally, and count money until their hands cramped. Although this wasn't a positive thing, this was the essence of human nature. Anger. Anyone would be angry. In Buddhism, people would be angry. Jesus slapped the left side of the face and slapped the right side of the face. This wasn't something a normal person would do. Jealousy. Because the other party was better than oneself, whether it was a good job, more money, a beautiful girlfriend, or a good family. These were all jealousy. Who could pat their own mouth and say that they weren't jealous? Arrogance. This depended on the face. If one was good-looking, it was called arrogant. If one wasn't good-looking, it was called pretentious. Lust, gluttony, greed, laziness, anger, jealousy, and arrogance. These were the 7 deadly sins, but in fact, these were the most fundamental things of human nature. Li Shihuai was naturally not a saint. He had all these things. In his opinion, Lin Yun, and the others sacrificed themselves to accompany Jiang Hai. That was their blessing. It was what they deserved. He just leaked a little from his fingers, and it was enough to give them alms. Yes, it was alms, not compensation. This was the reality. People at their level would not bow their heads to these inferior people. But now Lin Yun said such words. How could he not be angry? Who do you think you are? You are not just an artist. You are called a star. What do you think you are? Don't you know it in your heart? Isn't your role to entertain the public? What's the difference between being coquettish on the stage and being coquettish off the stage? Looking at Lin Yun, Li Shihuai also stood up and said angrily. You bastard. Hearing Li Shihuai's words, Lin Yun, and Kim Taeyin almost couldn't stand it at the same time. But in fact, for Jiang Hai, these words didn't seem to be wrong. After all, in the ancient times of China, celebrities were the highest class of people. Well, let's change it to a more elegant word. But their job was still the same. So, he didn't really care about celebrities. Moreover, he also heard that there were quite a lot of celebrities in South Korea who were engaged in this kind of work. After all, South Korea itself was not big, and the celebrities had fewer ways to make money. So, when these two people, well, now Jiang Hai still didn't know their names. When these two people entered his room, he didn't have anything to worry about. But now, looking at the situation, they didn't seem to be willing. Although Jiang Hai was a bad person, he didn't seem to have forced others to do anything. Hey, don't hurt them. Now, seeing that Kim Taeyin and Lin Yun, were about to rush over like crazy, the 3 people over there also stood up for the first time. These 3 people were the people who came to negotiate and also the people who protected these 2. Seeing the 2 women rushing over here, they also stood up. Jiang Hai saw their movements and knew that these 3 people also had a background, so he immediately shouted loudly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the 3 people restrained themselves and only grabbed the hands of the 2 people in an instant. Seeing that they really couldn't get close to these people, the 2 people couldn't help but secretly snort. After glaring at Jiang Hai, they turned and left here. Watching them leave, Li Shihuai, who was still in shock, still had a face of lingering fear. These 2 guys, this is not over. Looking at the 2 people who went out, Li Shihuai said with a face of anger. Hearing Li Shihuai's words in front of him, Jiang Hai gently knocked on the table and said slowly, this matter ends here. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that South Korea can receive 900,000 tons of fodder. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Shihuai's face also changed, then he stood up and nodded seriously. Glancing at him, Jiang Hai thought for a while. He felt that it was a little inappropriate to let these two girls go out like this. Moreover, after such a commotion, he was not in the mood to eat, so he stood up and asked Cheryl to go back to the room first, then he walked out by himself. When he walked out of the hotel, he happened to see Lin Yun sitting on the steps in front of the hotel, crying sadly. Seeing this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little overwhelmed. To be honest, Jiang Hai didn't regret what he did the night before. But making a woman cry like this, Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed. After thinking for a while, he still walked over. Seeing Jiang Hai walking over, Kim Taiyan and Lin Yun both stopped crying and looked at Jiang Hai with an unfriendly face. Do you need me to say anything now? Looking at the two people in front of him, Jiang Hai said hesitantly. He was indeed a little hesitant because he didn't know what to say. It was impossible for him to admit his mistake. Moreover, he didn't think that he had done anything wrong. These two people came into his house because of Li Shihuai's plane. Logically speaking, he had already contacted the South Korea government and didn't let Li Shihuai's family die, so he was even. But now looking at them crying here, Jiang Hai really didn't know what to say. There's no need for that. To people like us, aren't you all always high and mighty? What can we ask you to say? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kim Taeyan's eyes were a little cold, and then she said with a serious face. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai was even more embarrassed. He really wanted to stand up and go back, but after thinking about it, it seemed that this was not very good. Looking around, Jiang Hai waved to the waiter over there, and then said something. In less than a minute, a bunch of keys appeared in Jiang Hai's hand. Jiang Hai didn't know whether to laugh or cry, he just wanted to borrow a car, but this kid seemed to be very helpful. He directly gave Jiang Hai a Rolls-Royce. Jiang Hai glanced at the car and then went to the parking lot. Not long after, a Rolls-Royce stopped in front of the two. Come on in. Although I can't call out your names now, you are public figures after all. If you are photographed sitting here crying, it will probably affect your career. I'll take you home. Looking at the two people in front of him, Jiang Hai said to them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Kim Taeyan couldn't help but hesitate. After all, there was a grudge between them and Jiang Hai. Let's go. It's a waste if we don't take it. I've already been, what is there to be afraid of? But Lin Yun seemed to be going all out. She wiped her tears and then directly pulled Kim Taeyan into the back seat of the car. After closing the door, Jiang Hai also shrugged. He was really looking for something to do. But since he had already said it, he was embarrassed to go back like this. He could only start the engine and drive forward. But they didn't notice that when the car drove away, a few lights flashed in the grass in the distance. Chapter 838. Have we arrived? Looking at Jean Taiyan, who ordered him to stop, Jiang Hai asked the two people in the back seat with some doubts. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people also looked at him. They didn't say anything, just stared at him, making Jiang Hai feel a little embarrassed. As mentioned before, Jiang Hai is not a saint, but he is not a heartless person. Now seeing them in so much pain and struggling, to be honest, he is a little embarrassed. We haven't arrived yet, say something. Seeing that the two of them didn't speak, Jiang Hai couldn't help but scratch his head, then said helplessly. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, the two of them also took a deep breath. Don't think that we will thank you and forgive you just because you sent us back. Looking at Jiang Hai, Jean Taiyan thought for a while and said first. In fact, her thoughts about Jiang Hai are indeed a little strange, but even if Jiang Hai pretends to be a good person now, he can't get their forgiveness. After all, Jiang Hai did such an excessive thing to them. To be honest, I don't need your words of gratitude and forgiveness, because to a certain extent, I don't owe you anything. After all, I have done what I promised you. Hearing what Jean Taiyan said, Jiang Hai shrugged. He has always been a donkey that goes with the flow. If you go against him, there will be no good result. You bastard. Then why did you send us back, bastard? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Lin Yuner couldn't help but shout loudly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shrugged lightly. Maybe I suddenly owed you, but whether you are grateful to me or not, whether you forgive me or not, it doesn't matter to me because I will probably leave South Korea the day after tomorrow, and then I probably won't be able to come back in this life. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also shrugged. To be honest, there is really nothing for Jiang Hai to miss in South Korea. You scum. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two couldn't help but be stunned. Then Kim Taeyen opened the door, said something to Jiang Hai, and left with Lin Yuner. After getting out of the car, the two seemed to be afraid that Jiang Hai would follow them. They ran directly into the darkness. Jiang Hai looked at their backs and couldn't help but curl his lips. Scum? Is there a scum like me? It seems that I am indeed quite a scum. Forget it, scum is scum. But this nickname is a little unfair. After all, I haven't done anything too scum. Looking at the two disappearing, Jiang Hai curled his lips and sat in the driver's seat self-deprecatingly. Looking at the night scenery outside, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile helplessly. I didn't even have dinner. I will eat after going back to the hotel. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai was about to start the engine and go back, but just as he was about to leave, the door of the villa in front of him suddenly opened. Then a young woman in casual clothes walked out with some garbage and threw it into the trash can on the roadside, waiting for the garbage truck to take it away tomorrow. Looking at this young woman, Jiang Hai suddenly froze. Because this woman, he actually knew her. Scum? Then let's see what scum do. Recalling the words of the two people just now, Jiang Hai's mouth couldn't help but curl up. Then he got out of the car and slowly walked to the front of the villa. After the young woman just threw the garbage, she had already gone back. Jiang Hai walked to the front of the villa, picked up the phone, and dialed the number on it. Dudu, Yamasayo, hello? Maybe. After the phone rang twice, a female voice came from the other side of the phone. Listening to this familiar female voice, Jiang Hai also chuckled. It's me. Facing the female voice on the phone, Jiang Hai said very plainly. I know, what's the matter? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the female voice on the other side was obviously anxious. She lowered her voice and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also smiled. It seems that she is very afraid of me. I suddenly have something to tell you. Can you please open the door? Listening to the voice on the other side of the phone, Jiang Hai said with a smile, and hearing what Jiang Hai said, the woman was clearly stunned. What do you mean? After thinking about it, she asked Jiang Hai directly. It means literally, I'm outside your house. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also chuckled and said. Bang! After Jiang Hai said this, the female voice on the other side also hung up the phone instantly. After waiting for about 10 seconds, the door opened. In front of Jiang Hai, a frightened face appeared. The owner of the face is called Han Jiren. Why are you here? Did you investigate me, or did you follow me? No matter what the reason is, please leave immediately, my husband is at home. Looking at Jiang Hai, Han Jiren said to him in a trembling voice. At the same time, she lowered her voice for fear of being heard by others, and her eyes were full of panic. Don't be too nervous, I just happened to pass by here and saw you taking out the trash. I don't have any malice, I'm just a little hungry, so I came to find something to eat. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled and shrugged at her. You just want to eat? Hearing Jiang Hai's shameless remarks, Han Jiren really didn't know what to say, but she didn't dare to be too excited to anger Jiang Hai or attract other people, so she could only ask while gritting her teeth. Of course. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded and said to her with a smile. Then, come in. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, she glanced back upstairs, then said softly. Then she stepped aside and let Jiang Hai in. After Jiang Hai came in, he didn't make any sound. After changing his shoes, he looked at this small villa. He has to admit that this small villa is really exquisite. It has a homey feeling. Where are your husband and child? Looking at Han Jiaran who came back, Jiang Hai asked with some doubts. My husband drank and is sleeping upstairs, the child is with my mother. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Han Jiaran also lowered her voice and said to Jiang Hai, then she didn't give him any face and went straight into the kitchen. And Jiang Hai looked at her, touched his chin, then followed her into the kitchen. There are only ramen and rice cakes, can I cook ramen with rice cakes? Seeing Jiang Hai come in, Han Jiaran, who opened the refrigerator door and looked around, raised her head, holding 2 packs of shinramen and a box of rice cakes in her hand, and asked Jiang Hai. Yes. Jiang Hai never liked to eat instant noodles, but now is not the time to be picky, so he said with a smile. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Han Jiaran also began to cook. As for Jiang Hai, he was looking at this small villa. There are 3 rooms on the first floor of the small villa, one of them is a large bathroom, and the other one should be a children's room, because the floor of the room is made of foam, with English letters and some patterns on it, making it convenient for children to crawl on it. The other room should be the reception room, and in addition, there is the kitchen. At the same time, Jiang Hai also came upstairs quietly. There are 3 rooms upstairs, but they are all occupied. Among them, a man is sleeping in the largest bedroom at this time. This man has a big nose and single eyelids. He is not handsome, but he is a little handsome, at least in Jiang Hai's eyes, he is very ordinary. It seems that this person should be Han Jiaran's husband. Why are you here? Just when Jiang Hai saw her husband there, Han Jiaran suddenly appeared behind Jiang Hai, then pulled Jiang Hai's clothes, and whispered nervously and fearfully. Come and see my enemy. Looking at Han Jiaran's appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. Suddenly, he wanted to tease her. After saying this, he directly pulled her into his arms, then lowered his head and kissed her. When Han Jiaran was attacked by Jiang Hai, her first thought was to struggle away, but after struggling for a while, she saw her husband through the gap of the door. Her struggling suddenly stopped, because she was afraid that if she moved too much, she would wake her husband up. She could only stand there stiffly, and let Jiang Hai attack her. And soon, Jiang Hai was not satisfied with just the lips, and his hands began to attack her. Feeling Jiang Hai's movements, Han Jiaran's shame, fear, she actually had a trace of feeling that she should not have, and her legs unconsciously clamped together. Feeling her movements, Jiang Hai's hand also slid down, but at this time, Han Jiaran suddenly pushed Jiang Hai away. Do you still want to eat noodles? If not, then leave. Looking at Jiang Hai, she panted and said to him angrily. Eat, of course, not only do I want to eat noodles, I also want to eat you. Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai leaned over and said to her. You rogue, you bastard. No, not here. Feeling Jiang Hai leaning over again, Han Jiaran was also embarrassed and angry, but she found that it was impossible to point at Jiang Hai's conscience now, so she could only grit her teeth and say to Jiang Hai. After hearing her words, Jiang Hai also smiled. If it can't be here, it proves that it can be somewhere else. Jiang Hai has never been a good person, he is also very sure of this. Now that the arrow is on the bow, he has to shoot, how can he be polite? He picked up Han Jiaran, quickly went to the first floor, and entered the empty children's room. At this time, Han Jiaran's husband, who was sleeping upstairs, frowned slightly, he seemed to feel something in his sleep. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.